Mike Clelland is a researcher and writer focused on the mysterious connection between UFO contact experiences, synchronicities, and owls. His books include The Messengers, Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee. We talked all about those topics, along with the connection between owls and death, and much more. Before the interview, I wanted to share some interesting owl facts. In ancient Greece, owls represented Athena, the goddess of wisdom. However, the Romans were terrified of the bird and thought it was the bearer of bad omens. The Aztecs and Mayans feared and hated the owl and believed the wide-eyed birds were symbols of death and destruction. The Egyptians believed that owls protected the spirits of the dead as they journeyed to the underworld. In Australia, the Wardaman tribe believes that Gordol, the owl, created the world. The largest owl on record is Cuba's extinct giant owl. If the 3.6-foot tall owl could fly, it would have been one of the largest flighted birds in the world. In 2300 BC, the Sumerians depicted Lilitu, the goddess of death, as a winged woman with feet like an owl's, a crown similar to an owl's ear tuft, and 2 owls for companions. Her name is derived from an ancient word meaning night. Thank you so much for doing this with me, Mike. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while, especially since my recent conversation with Diana Walsh Pasulka, where your kind of work came up. To start us off today, can you please talk a little bit about your background and introduce yourself to those who may not be familiar with you?
Sure. Firstly, it's my honor to be on the show. This has been great. I've been looking forward to this one. So my background. So I worked I'm 61. And I lived in New York City for a long time doing illustration work. And then I moved out west to be a ski bum for 1 year. That lasted 25 years. And so while I was out west, I taught for an outdoor school. I'm presently living in Seattle.
Yeah.
Or right in the Seattle area. I'm not in Seattle proper. And then I've been putting all my energies into writing in the last decade, really. Mm-hmm. And so if we turn as far as my research, as a boy in the 1970s, as a 12-year-old boy, I had a couple experiences that were pretty telling when I tell them, but it's a remarkable testament to one's ability to deny things. I was like, oh, I'm not going there. I'm happy to talk about those events. And then when I was 12 years old, and then when I was 30, which is half my life ago, I had a really powerful event that was very telling. I can tell it if you want, but wow, did I put the brakes on that. And I'm like, I am not going to deal with this. No way. So here, I'll tell that one quickly if I
Sure.
As a 30-year-old, I was living alone in a house in Maine in a rural area, and it was wintertime. It was the winter of 92, 93, and it would have either been January or February of 93. I don't have the exact date. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was a bright light pouring in the window. And I sat up on my elbow, and the way the window was and the way the bed was positioned, the bed was pushed right up against the window. So all I had to do was sit up and look right out the window. And there was a bright light in the yard, bright. And there were 5 gray beings, the classic beings with the big black eyes and the bald heads, walking towards my house.
Like in your garden, in your yard, walking towards...
and it was sort of where the driveway was, yeah. Right in the garden, the lawn was covered in snow at that point, but yeah. And there was no one else home, and there were no other houses around, so it was like they were coming. It was like they were coming to my house. And I tell this story, and I should have freaked out. And my memory I looked at these beings, and I did an illustration of these beings. Doing that drawing I did years later, but it was a very, very emotional doing the drawing, which is sort of a clue that for me that something happened. I was denying and treated it as a dream at the time. But in retrospect, I don't feel like it's a dream. But I saw these beings walking towards the house. They were right out the window. It wasn't like they were far away. And I heard a voice in my head that said, "Oh yes, they're here. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down." And that's exactly what I did, is put my head on the pillow and shut down. And so I only had the memory of for maybe 30 seconds. It's hard to know. Right. And what I can also say is that it was very dream-like, but I don't think it was a dream. In retrospect, I don't think it's a dream. And I've poured a lot of energy into this, trying to figure out what may or may not have gone down there. Now, there was a clarity, like a hyper clarity, that was involved in the event, which is unusual for me. And there was a sort of a distorted sense of reality itself. And I've talked to other researchers, so I'm kind of using catchphrases that I've accumulated over the last 30 years. But at the time, it was just like, nope, it's a dream. No way. I'm not going to go there. Not going to think about this. Not going to dwell on this. And so that is something that is consistently reported in these kind of events. Close proximity to either the beings or a craft, there is a distorted sense of reality, sometimes called the Oz factor, where the one key thing was eerily quiet, but it was nighttime in a house, so that was going to be quiet regardless. But there was a sense of, this is really hard to describe, there was a sense that my mind itself had been altered in a way where there was no mind chatter. Like I should have said, holy crap, there's these things walking towards the house. I got to like jump up and slam the door and get a knife and a baseball bat and defend myself. And I did none of that. I just like calmly went to sleep, which doesn't factor in at all to what my normal reaction or a correct reaction would have been exactly the opposite. So that was when I was 30. So I had these kind of events in my life. And then there came a point right around 30, right around there, where I started reading UFO literature. And that happened. It became somewhat compulsive. And I knew the implications of my own stories, but I wasn't going there. And then the owl thing, which has sort of come to dominate my research, has that in 2006, I think that's right, 2006. Yeah, I went camping for one night with a woman that I met in this town in Idaho, Idaho is right on the Wyoming border, and there's a national park there called Grand Teton National Park, which is connected to Yellowstone National Park. It's this magnificent part of the West. Yeah. Beautiful mountains, and just just an amazing chapter of my life to live in that terrain. And so I was working for an outdoor school at the time. I was teaching camping. I had spent the summer up in Alaska teaching outdoor skills in the mountains. And then I came back down to the lower 48, and it was October, very early October, like the first week of October. And the weather was glorious, and it's a magical time of the year. And I met this woman who I'm still very close friends with. And she had been living in this town all summer. And I said, hey, you must have been camping all summer. What a great spot. You've been living in this town and have these beautiful mountains here. Wow. And then she said, oh, I didn't camp at all. And I said, that's terrible. I'll take you camping. So, I mean, that's what I'm a professional camper. I was at the time. So I was totally in my element. So we took very little gear for one night. It was beautiful weather predicted. So we didn't take a shelter. We didn't take a tent. And we walked into the mountains. I didn't know her. It's a stranger, essentially. And we were sitting down on a big flat rock as the sun was setting. And I was making dinner on a little camp stove. And she said something. We were talking about something. This is an important part of the story that is subtle, but it's, wow, is it important to me? She said something, and it was very, very telling. And I was like, wow, this person is smarter and more spiritual and much more interesting than I ever would have suspected. And then as she was saying this owl flew right over us. And then a second owl. And then a third owl. And these three owls flew around us for about the next 2 hours as the sun set. We were in bear country. So what you do is you cook, and then you just get up and walk a little ways, a mile, and then you camp somewhere else. You don't have any food odors associated with your campsite. And so we got up and we moved, and the owls followed us, and we found this wonderful meadow, and we didn't have a tent, so we just laid in the wildflowers and set our sleeping pads down. It was really magical. And at that latitude, that far north, and at that elevation, in such an empty part of the West, the stars are mind-blowing, just magnificent. Yeah. So we're looking at the stars, lying on our backs, looking at the stars, and these owls would go whoosh and fly right over our eyes. And they would swoop down low. And so they don't make any noise in flight. And so for just half a second, the stars would be blotted out. It was really magical, really powerful. So the next morning we were like, whoa, that was cool. Huh? All those owls, that was great. So I said, hey, let's go camping again. This was wonderful. And she said, I'll go. Absolutely. So 4 days later, we went in the mountains and went to a totally different part of the mountains. And as the sun was setting, I said, let's go up to that hill. And we walked up to the top of this hill. We had a tent this time. The weather was a little more unsettled. We actually got snow down that night. And we walked up to the top of a hill. And as the sun was setting, 3 owls flew around us. 4 days later, same person, different part of the mountains. And this is like something I'm convinced, I can't prove it, but I feel very strongly those were the same 3 owls that we had seen the 4 days earlier.
Yeah.
By the way the crow flies, we were probably 3 or 4 miles away. So, but the hike in and stuff was a different direction completely. So, but, and to have it happen once was pretty cool, but to have it happen twice with the same person kind of was like a little unsettling. Not a little unsettling. It kind of freaked both of us out. And I did not say this at the time. I'm saying it now. It's in my books. I talk about it now. I did not say it at the time. I was looking at these real owls, and a voice in my head said, this has something to do with the UFOs. So and it's funny because there's something called a screen memory. We can talk about that at some point, but these were like, this is called a short-eared owl. They're like 10 inches tall or something like that. They're cute. They're like really sweet looking, and so there was nothing intimidating about them, but the voice in my head said, this has something to do with the UFOs. So I started looking into owls. Both of us did. Her and I were like, this is early on in the ease of Googling things. Mm-hmm. And so we were looking up spirit animal meaning of owls and totem animal meanings and spirit, Native American lore and mythic lore. And because I heard that voice about the UFOs, I started looking into my own UFO experiences. So all that stuff, like, no way, I'm not going there, I'm not going to deal with this. I took that step and reached out to some researchers, Leo Sprinkle in particular, who has since passed. And he was living in Laramie, Wyoming, which by Western standards was fairly close to where I was. So he, like, I told Leo the owl story, and then he said, oh, you know who you should talk to? You should talk to this person. And then he would give me a phone number. This person should talk to you. And I would get a phone call from someone and say, hey, Leo told me I should call you. So I was all of a sudden interacting with people. And I asked all the people, starting then, I asked them the same question. Hey, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And they would say, and especially initially, these people would say, no one's ever asked me that, but I have the weirdest experiences with owls. Really? And then they would tell me these stories, and I started to keep track of these stories and write them down. And I started a blog in 2009, which was 3 years after seeing the owls in the mountains. And in that blog, originally that blog was only going to be about synchronicities, which I have had a lot of. So I was going to write about synchronicities. And they're great blog posts, right? They're short, and they got a little punchline, and they're interesting. And almost from the beginning of the blog, there was this almost like this unconscious push to go towards the UFO stuff, which I did not want to do. And so the story I just told about Kristen was right on the first couple of posts. I think it was the second post, right, was that exact story about Kristen. And then I wrote there, said she was talking about something interesting at the time we saw the first owl. So I called her up and I asked, like, Kristen, what were we talking about the first night we saw the first owls? And she said, oh, I remember exactly what I was talking about. She said, I was giving my deepest, most heartfelt definition of what God means to me. Mm. And that like, I'm not at all churchy in that respect, but I certainly recognize the sort of mythic power of that statement.
Mm-hmm.
So right from me dipping my toe into this field, where I was looking not only at the UFO thing, I was looking at synchronicities, and I was looking at owls. Like that mythic power of her saying that really said, oh, there's something much bigger at play here, and much richer at play here. And I so that was my way into this research. So I have been researching both the UFO contact experience and owls, and I've been archiving and documenting a lot of synchronicities as far as people who have this involvement.
Yeah, wow. Those experiences sound incredible and hard to digest. Do you feel like you've totally got your head around them now, or do you still grapple with them? I
totally grapple with them. Yeah. But what I say is, all I can say is, I try to do this because there's some people in the field who don't do this, and it's a little annoying to me. If I don't know something, I'm going to say I don't know it. And if I'm speculating about something, I'll say I am speculating. So there's two different, there's speculation and there's knowing something, and they are not the same thing. So I do not know the source of this mystery, but I can say that there is a phenomena at play, and it's a rich, complex phenomena, and the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, that, like, for instance, we're being visited by little scientists from another planet on a metal spaceship. Boy, you can cherry pick the data and make a really good case for that. But in order to do that, you have to deny huge chunks of the data. You have to, like, ignore lots to make that claim. And I mean, it might be partially true, or might be folded into the mystery somehow, but like, I'm not trying to solve the totality of the mystery. I'm simply trying to tell the stories, or give a forum in a book form or a podcast form, or like this right now here. And I think the stories have within them so much richness. And I guess in my first book, in the introduction, I said, I am a disciple of the story. So, like, I'm not trying to please academics. I'm not trying to please scientists. I'm trying to please myself. This is a completely subjective study for me. Like, I've been having owl experiences. I've been having what feel like UFO contact experiences, and I'm searching for totally selfish personal reasons, and I'm not trying to please anyone else. I'm trying to grapple with this mystery myself.
Yeah. So what year was it that you said you started kind of collating the UFO and owl, like the cases where they have both UFOs and owls come up? When did you start collecting
that?
Those?
Would have been as I started the blog. So really formally 2009. Anecdotally, I kind of had the file cabinet in my head was getting filled with owl stories before then, but it was 2009, which is now 15 years ago.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And do you know how many you've collected at this point? Like, how many kind of reports you've got overall?
I wish I could give an answer to that. Well, many thousands, I'll say that.
Really?
But I know it's like, and it's,
so it's like north of 2,000 kind of thing, or?
Well, there's like kind of an A+ story, right? So someone says, hey, I heard you talk on a podcast, and then me and my husband saw this really pretty owl on a drive. It was on a tree, and it was on a branch. It was really pretty. I'm like, oh, that's all well and good, but that doesn't make it in my files. And and the people who tell of telepathic communication with owls, or some incredibly rich, like, what I'm finding is that these stories are very seldom simple. The people who have these experiences, well, here's the one experience, and it folds into this experience, and I had a synchronicity that connected it to this other experience, and I met this person totally by chance, and so these things are all knotted up.
Yeah.
So they're and any researcher will recognize that there's this complexity to the experience that I find is a sort of confirmation for me. Like, if someone was lying they would make the story make sense, right? If they were trying to fool me, they would try to give a beginning, middle, and end the same way you have like on a Twilight Zone episode. It has a, it's got a framework that we can all understand. The contact experience does not have that framework. It's a mess. And that's that makes it a little hard to tell those stories, but that's woven into the mystery itself. I'm not so So yeah, I do the thing which I'm very good at, which you asked a question, and I think I went around the block a little bit, and I'm not sure if I actually answered your question at all.
I mean, I don't think you have like an answer in terms of like I have 2,391 cases, but like, yeah, what's your, if we're talking about your files, not the ones that, people mention, oh yeah, I saw an owl on the way home after listening, or I was listening to your podcast with Ben and saw an owl as I was listening, or, it's nice.
Oh, that
but
counts.
like you
that
say,
counts.
that counts. Okay.
Oh yeah, that counts. I like that one. That counts a lot where people, that happens.
Well, hopefully
really
that
normal.
happens this time. But yeah, so of the ones that count, like what's your best kind of estimation for now of how many there would be, like to the closest, say 250 or something like that? Closest
2,000.
To about 2,000, give or take. Okay, that's quite a few. And can I ask you a couple of questions about like how many of those cases feature this or feature that? So for example, how many of those cases, again, I know we're like approximately, right?
I'm not anecdotally, I can wing it a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, so, I won't hold you to, I'm not going to go and comb through all your files and say you were out.
Oh, I would love you to. I would love someone
there.
to comb through my files and give me some data. I'm one person. I'm getting 6 a day.
Really? 6 a day?
6 stories a day.
Wow.
And some of them are like people, someone sent me a 72-page document. It was great. It was great. It was like really thoughtful. Someone really did some beautiful it was so, yeah, but yeah, some of them, it's like, it's not like, no one just, it's not like a 3-paragraph thing I get. They're monstrous.
Yeah. I guess it's because people are really happy to share it and get it off their chest and kind of vent about something, because it's not the kind of thing you can talk about with everybody and it's not an everyday kind of conversation, I guess, with your normal friends and family. So yeah, roughly again, what percentage would you say of the reports you have on file involve multiple owls?
Oh, multiple owls, probably a lower percent. 10%.
Something, yeah.
Well, it might be, but like if you say multiple owls at one event, like I walked into a field and there were 10 owls, I don't get that very often. I do have people say I saw an owl and last week I saw an owl. So that like the owl will be reoccurring, or like having owl synchronicities, and I'm open to like owl lunchboxes and owl T-shirts showing up at highly charged moments. Someone's talking about like people walking down the street, they're talking about God or they're talking about spiritual things, and it's punctuated by someone walking by with a owl T-shirt. We don't live in a world where there's owls all the time. It's not like we're in the forest, like our ancestors might have been in a little village setting where wildlife was interacting with us in a different way. So I do factor in symbolic owls.
Yeah, why not? I mean, you've got to be open to all things, right? We don't know exactly what's going on. These things are big mysteries after all. And yeah, with the recurring ones, that's interesting. Like, I don't know if have you noticed any patterns with those recurring kind of owl encounters? Like, do they ever lead up to something? Do they kind of, get more frequent as somebody approaches some life event, and then, or like a death of a loved one or something? I don't know. I'm speculating and my mind's running, but yeah.
So it's interesting so oftentimes I will interact with folks. I'll do some phone calls. We'll exchange a lot of emails. There'll be some back and forth. I'll make a document. The document goes on file. Sometimes those documents get really long too. So, but the information is remarkable. So what I found is that people will, they'll kind of talk and spill their experience, and often it's very emotional. Like they're like the letters often start, which any UFO researchers will tell you this. The letters will start like, I've never told this to anyone, or I've only told it to a few people. I can't tell my wife. I can't tell my boss. But I'm telling you, meaning me. And then, so like I recognize there's I need to honor that. And oftentimes all I can do is say, you're not alone. I may not have heard that story exactly, but I can say I've heard many with that same flavor and mood. So what often happens is I'll go through a phase of interacting with folks, and then they'll get back to me like years later and say, "Oh, my life has changed enormously, and I'm now." I know one woman who like became a Buddhist monk, shaved her head, and wears orange robes, right? So there's like profound changes. So the questions I ask to witnesses are not the same questions that's on like the MUFON checklist. I don't know if you can hear the roosters in the background or not.
Yeah.
But
owls.
yeah, there's lots of owls where I live, so I hear owls almost every night. But that's not anything mystical. I do live in a place where there's lots of owls. So the questions I ask is, what was going on in your life leading up to the event?
Yeah.
What changed after the event? And by the event, like I'm trying as like a thought experiment. This thought experiment's been going on for 15 years. So, but I try not to weight owls more than UFOs. Like if someone had a powerful owl experience and someone else had a powerful UFO experience, I don't try to weight those two. I try to weight them equally. Mm-hmm. There's lots of owls and not many UFOs, let's say. So and then I also factor in synchronicity into that, where I treat synchronicity like a powerful synchronistic event, equally weighted, as these are all in essence mystical experiences. The owl on the fence is not a mystical experience. The owl at a highly charged moment, or the owl, like punctuating a real life event, that's more of a mystical experience or a paranormal event. So it's really, you asked a tough question, because I could anecdotally come up with lots of examples where the patterns lie is tough. That's what I'm sort of looking for, is like if I get a one-off. Here, I'll tell you a one-off story that I got a while ago. I've since gotten about 3 of these stories. A woman is driving. There's no UFO in this story, but it has everything to do with this mystery of the owls. Woman sends me a letter, and she says, "I'm a happy grandmother." And I haven't told this story to many people. I haven't told this story for years, but I'm telling you, I, as a teenager, was terribly depressed, and I was going to kill myself. I was going to commit suicide. And I got in my car, and I had a spot all picked out in the forest. I was going to drive down this lonely road, and there was a little turnoff where I was going to do it. And I took my parents' car, and I had a hose in the car and a pillow in the car, so I could take the hose from the exhaust into the cab, and then I could put the pillow in the back seat, and I could lay down. And I was driving to the spot, and in to get to the spot, I had to slow down to make the turn to the spot where I was going to park. She was slowing down to make the turn, and as she slowed down, an owl, this was nighttime, an owl flew right up to the windshield. She said it was snowing at the time. And it flapped its wings, and she said she locked eyes, and it felt like we stared at each other for 30 seconds. She says she knows they didn't, but it was like, that's what it felt like. We locked eyes. And she said, I took it totally as a sign that life would get better. So I turned around and came home. Wow. There is no way to interpret that story other than to say the owl saved her life. And I would tell that story, but I made sure to say that was a one-off. I do not see a pattern of that. I do have a pattern of seeing that now, where other people have told me that story, and I don't think they were influenced by hearing me on a podcast or reading that account. So that's the kind of power that is folded into these accounts. I have lots of stories of people driving down the road. There's no UFO in these stories. They're driving down the road. This owl is standing in the road. Whoa, they got to put on the brakes and slow down, and the owl flies off. And then, so they've either slowed down or come to a complete halt on a lonely road, and around a blind corner, vroom, a car races around and crosses the median, crosses the center line. And if they had not stopped, they would have been in a head-on collision. Yeah. So I've got lots of stories like that, where the owl, in one form or another, essentially saves someone's life.
Yeah.
Or saves them from a catastrophic event. Yeah.
Yeah, potentially, saves their life. Yeah, fascinating. What percentage, again, of your cases would you say involve, approximately, involve other animals, other animals, as well as owls, or instead of owls? I don't know if you have cases that aren't owls at all.
Hawks, hummingbirds, crows, ravens. Yeah, so it would be ravens, hawks, and then deer
Mm-hmm.
would be the and then floated into that is like other squirrels and raccoons and such like that. So yeah, lots. So what percentage? So I'm asking for owl stories, right? Right, you go to my blog, right at the top of the blog, go to my website, right at the top of the website, it says, I want to hear your owl stories. So I'm getting the owl stories,
Yeah.
but it's probably 5 or 10% that involve other animals.
As well as owls, or is it sometimes just the other animal?
Sometimes it's just the other animal. I had a wonderful story of a woman who she contacted me and she said, she contacted me. She's like, this, and she was a private detective. She was a great witness. She was great to talk with because she was going to solve this. So she said, I was coming home every night and there would be a hawk on my garage on the peak. We pulled in the garage and there's like the peak of the thing. The owl was right on the peak of the roof. And a hawk on the garage. And she was like, well, what it's there. It's really strange. It's there all the time. And what do I do? And she asked me and I said, well, I don't know. You could ask it. So she came home and one night the hawk was on top of her garage. And she said, I respectfully ask what message you have for me, because I don't understand this kind of communication. So I respectfully ask, please tell me, find a way to tell me why you're on my roof.
Mm-hmm.
So the hawk flies off. She walks into the house. The phone rings and there's no one there. And then so she did the call. What do you call it? The reverse call. Your redial thing. So she found out where the call had come from, but there's no phone number there. But it came I don't know what it's like in the UK, but there's what's called the exchange, which is an old thing for a dial-up phone. So there was exchanges and those would be named. So it came from what was called Francine, Massachusetts. Right. So she was thought it was a town. There is no town, Francine, Massachusetts. It's an exchange that the phone company used to use, but no longer uses. And then she told me, my mother just died recently and her name is Francine.
Oh, wow.
So that was, so she felt that the owl was somehow an intermediary of her mother, or that it was her mother herself, which is very common. I have a lot of stories of owls showing up after someone's death, and a lesser number of other animals showing up after a death. Owls, I'm asking for owl stories, so I'm getting them. So there's no surprise that that's what I'm getting. But I thought that was a beautiful example of a genuine mystery. Like there was no phone call. It came from an exchange called Francine, and that was the name of her mother, who had just recently passed on.
Yeah, that is incredible. Do you know how many roughly accounts you've got like that? It could be owls or other animals, but when they come close after a death, and do you know how close they normally seem to, again, if you have enough to kind of draw that kind of information from it?
Oh, and the percentage? So I would say that 10% of my accounts involve death. 10. I'm rough. I'm making that up, but it's not a huge.
It's a significant.
It's a recognizable pattern.
Yeah.
And that's one thing people say, are you going to write another book about owls? And I'm like, I'll do this for you. This is my little visual aid here. So here's my 3 books. So they're 3 books on owls and UFOs. And this is, you stack these things up and it's actually almost to the page number, 1,000 pages. This is 1,000 pages of owls and UFOs. And they say, hey, Mike, you going to write another book? I'm like, oh, good grief. If I can't say it in 1,000 pages, it's not going to do me any good to write another book. Trying to it's going to be the same story. And people will ask, do you have enough accounts to write more books? And I'm like, I could write 500 books, but it'd be the same story over and over and over again. So I wouldn't be putting any new information out there. What I can say is that the death, as far as a theme, so the owls and death is an ancient myth. It's in our folklore. It's in Shakespeare. There's events in Macbeth and in Julius Caesar, I think, where an owl hoots, and right from the stage, someone's doing a little sound effect from the backstage and making owl hooting noise, and it plays right into the plot. And it's just before the death of a character. Now, owls arriving before a death
That's like an omen, kind of, yeah.
is an omen. It's foreshadowing. That's in the folklore. That's all over the folklore. It's Native American. That's in Africa. That's in Russia. That's all over the folklore, the ancient folklore. It's in our pop. It's like shows up in movies all the time. Oh my God, I'm so hyper aware of it. If there's some scene where like the people are walking through the woods at night and it's a thriller kind of movie and there's an owl hooting, I'm just like, oh, someone's gonna die. Someone's gonna die. They're just like, it's gonna like, and then sure enough, like the bad guys come out of the bushes and it's anyway. So 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 the owls and death thing is really consistent. Can I tell one story that my
Absolutely,
own story?
yeah.
This is a little bit of a long story, but this one, it was really, you'll understand. So my mother died in 2013, and she had been suffering from Alzheimer's terribly for a number of years. And her last few years were sad, and she was frightened all the time. It was awful. And so I was on one side of the bed and my sister was on the other side of the bed when she passed away. It was really a powerful, beautiful human experience. I mean, I'm not the first person to sit by the parents' bedside, but wow, was it powerful. And it was a relief. She was suffering terribly. And so my sister was there. My brother was out of the room, but he was close by. So the family was there. And and at that point in my life, I was already well immersed in the UFO owl connection thing, and I was getting letters. So I was staying with my sister at her house, and my mother's was at a hospice care facility just a few miles down the road from my sister's house. So my brother and sister and I were all at the same house, and someone was always with my mother. We had someone sitting with her 24 hours a day for those last 3 or 4 days of her life. So I would get up in the morning and I would sit with my sister and I would check my email and I'd say, Jeannie, like, here's a little story. Like, this is just came in last night. And I'd read an owl story to her. And you could tell she was like, what are you? This is so weird. And I'm like, yeah, no, like, I know it is, but this is what I'm getting. And these stories would arrive. And so I'd read them. So my sister was well aware of this. My brother was also well aware of it, that I was doing this research. So after my mother died, she died at like 3:30 in the morning or something like that. So like the next day we were trying to sleep. At the same time, we were trying to take care of like the requirements of funerals. And so we were all like loopy with no sleep and just the emotions of it. And so at the end of that day, the following day, the sun is setting. My sister lives in the south and it's beautiful. And there's big trees in her yard and we're on this back porch and she's on this big couch in this beautiful yard. And we're drinking a glass of wine, and her neighbor from across the street, Ruthie, was there. And Ruthie sits down, and she's across from us, and I'm in the middle. Jeannie's on one side, Jim's on the other. And Ruthie says, Jim, and Ruthie's wonderful. Let me just add this. Ruthie is wonderful. Ruthie radiates this honesty. This, like, if you want a witness, or you want someone you're not going to find a more trustworthy person than her. So she says, Jim, Jean, Mike, I know there is an afterlife. I know there is an afterlife. And I know because of an experience with an owl. And when she says that, my sister literally does this. She goes, I don't want to hear about this owls. No. Because it was like, and my brother does this. He looks at me like this. He gives me this look like, did you put her up to this? What is going on here? Did you pay her to tell? See, he like gave me this look like he was like, and I'm in the middle, and Ruthie, you could see Ruthie's face like, what did I just say? What did I? And I'm like, okay, Ruthie, you don't know it. I've been doing research on owls and how they're connected to paranormal events, including death, including UFOs, including other mystical events. I want to hear your story. So she says, after my daddy died, she's very Southern and very proper. She said, after my daddy died, I would walk the trail, the nature trail. There's a nature trail around the neighborhood. And I would walk this nature trail every day to try to come to terms with the grieving. And every day I would pass an owl. Like I was trying to come to terms with the loss of my father. So I would walk this nature trail every day. And that was her intention, to come to terms with grieving while walking on the trail. And she said, and every day I'd pass an owl. And then there came a day where I passed the owl and it hooted at me. And I stopped and I looked at this thing and I thought, owls shouldn't be out in the day. It was on the same branch, the same tree every day. And she looked at this owl and she said, "Are you my daddy?" And she said, at that moment, all my grieving went away. Wow. And the owl flew off and never came back. And she said, "I feel so blessed that such a beautiful creature would be the messenger from my daddy." And that's where I got the line, "the messenger," for the title of the book. It wasn't just Ruthie. It was a lot of people would say, "Oh, the owl landed in the backyard and I had a telepathic message." And then, and then they would stop calling it the owl and call it the messenger. And then the messenger, flew from the branch on the tree and came back the next night. But anyway, they organically started calling it the messenger. So that story of Ruthie talking to the owl as if it was her deceased father is incredibly consistent. Like wow, is this a pattern? A parent dies, most often a parent. I have one, so most often a parent, and the relief of grieving is what I'm finding. So I'm not finding. I have some stories where the owl precedes a death. I have one story where someone's father was, I think he had a heart attack, and they put him in the back of the ambulance, and the son hopped into the back of the ambulance with the father. So they're looking out the back door of the ambulance, and it's in their yard, and there's an owl on a branch looking right into the back of the ambulance. And in that case, the father did die. So I have some accounts where owls show up as a foreshadowing the death of a loved one, but it is far outnumbered by owls showing up after. And those events where the owl shows up after tends to be really beautiful and heartening. Wow, I could fill 3 hours easy with owl stories of after someone dies.
Maybe next time we'll do that, because I'm totally fascinated by that as well. And would you say they more often kind of, like what's the kind of general time lapse in between the death and the owl showing up? Is it normally, you said it kind of coincides with the reduction in the grief kind of subsiding. So is it like a week or 2 weeks, or is it more often sooner than that?
Sooner than that, yeah. I have one story where a guy is leaving the hospital. His father died of a massive heart attack. He said he was dead before he hit the floor. I was in the room with him. He was like, the doctor said, no. He was like, and so he's at the hospital. He's dealing with the doctors. He's late at night. All these issues. His father is gone. He said it was actually as far as a way to. He said it was like basically a painless way to die. He watched him die. Like boom, he was just in mid sentence. Bam, he was gone. And so he leaves the hospital, middle of the night. Hospital's pretty much empty. The little mechanical doors open. He steps out onto the sidewalk. And then on the grass right next to the sidewalk is a little owl staring up at him. So he stops and he says, "Dad, I love you. You were a great father. I feel honored that I had the chance to be your son. I feel honored, and I'm going to miss you terribly." So that was, unless the owl flew into the hospital, that was the very first chance he would have had to see an owl. So essentially, like within minutes, let's say hours of his father passing, this owl shows up. Yeah. Very common.
And you'd say most of them are within, like, could you give a rough, like most of them within 2-3 days, or is it, what would you say, like the majority of those?
That would be tough. I have here's another. This is me. This is again me. When my dad died, he died almost exactly 1 year before my mother died. He had a form of dementia that was diagnosed as Alzheimer's. Afterwards, they realized it was dementia, which has got a different set of internal. It presents with the same symptoms. It's a different mechanism inside the body. We're driving to where the funeral is going to be held. I'm with my sister in the car. And as we're pulling in, we're like pulling in to where the funeral is going to be held. A dove passes right across the windshield. And my sister, I'm like so aware of this stuff at this point now. I'm so hyper aware. And I remember I went, a dove. And my sister didn't see it at all. She's like, what are you talking about? It's like, that dove, this mourning dove just flew right across the, and so we go into the room. And so my sister had a little table that she brought from home. It was like a little stand. And that's where the urn, my father's ashes were going to be in an urn on that table. She says, Mike, go out to the car and grab that table. So I walk out to the car, and it's a hatchback. So I open up the hatch in the back, and in the car right next to me, like this far, like I could touch that car, was a mourning dove on the, like that far away. Like if I did that, I could have touched this. Yeah. And it was looking at me. And I said, Dad. So I talked to this mourning dove. Dad, I recognize the symbols. Mourning dove. It's right there in the name, mourning dove. And a dove is a symbol of peace. And in the name mourning, it's M-O-U-R-N. It's like to mourn. Mm-hmm. And I just talked to this. I was getting the stand that would hold my dad's ashes. And this dove did not fly away. Again, I'm saying this, I don't know for sure. I am convinced, I can't prove it, but I'm convinced that dove on the back of that car was the same dove that crossed our path as we pulled into and I was like, oh, I have a lot of stories like that. So that was not an owl, but it has the same mythic power, let's say the same symbolic power of an owl. So. Yeah.
When you look back on that one, how do you kind of unpack and grapple with that? Like, do you think that was your dad, your father, or do you think it was kind of sent or influenced in some way, like by your father to, do you see what I'm getting at? Like,
I know exactly what you're saying.
How do you kind of make sense of how do you try to explain that to yourself? I guess what do you tell yourself was going on there? What's your speculations?
Well, I certainly talked to the mourning dove the same way I would have talked to my dad. Like I spoke to the mourning dove as if it was my father.
Did it do anything? Like, did it just stand there?
No, just looked right at me.
Yeah.
And then I went out, and then I came back out again, and it was gone. So I went back in, I carried the table back in, but I stood there for a minute or so and just talked to this thing very, very solemnly. And so was it my father? Like, I actually know psychics. Well, you do this kind of work. I know psychics and mediums and oh my gosh. And
didn't used to.
So and tarot readers and some of the mediums, that would be a psychic who talks to the people who've passed on. They're kind of, this one she's pretty funny. Her name is Marla. She's like, don't like. So she argues that it's not your father. That's the bird. Mm-hmm. But there's a symbolic language, like a storybook language that's being presented in real life, or let's say a dream language that's being presented in real life. Mm-hmm. And I'm very comfortable with that. Now, how would I know whether it was really my dad or not? But I'll tell you, I spoke to it as if it was my father, and that is consistent. I have I could go on here. I'll tell one more. A civic leader dies in a town. And a reporter contacts me and says, like, I covered the story. Something happened. I couldn't put it in the newspaper, but I'm telling you. And she sent me pictures too. And there was someone had died in the town. He was a civic leader, and they had a memorial in the town square. So the town square is like a typical American town square with a gazebo in the park right downtown. So at nighttime, everyone's there. A barn owl, which is a white owl, lands on a lamppost. Mm-hmm. And she said, everyone just lined up. No one had to tell them. They lined up. They stood in line, and the first person in line would be right at the base of the lamppost, and they would say, John, you were a great friend. You were a great friend. The town's going to miss you. We all loved you. And then they would say goodbye and they would speak to the owl, and the owl would look down at them, and that person would step out of the way, and the next person would step up and say, John, it's been an honor to know you. Really been an honor to know you. It's broke my heart when I found out you died. So these people organically They waited in line and talked to this owl as if it was their dead friend. I am convinced that someone someone's dad died in a mastodon hunting accident, and they stepped out of the cave and there was an owl waiting for them, and they talked to the owl as if it was their dead father. I'm convinced that this is something that has been with us all throughout human history. This is nothing new that I'm seeing as a pattern. Other people have seen this too. There's an English doctor named I think it's Peter Fenwick or Fenwick. I think it's Fenwick.
Fenwick, yeah.
Yeah, he covers this extensively in his books. Yeah, not extensively.
He covers that incident that you're talking about there.
No, not this incident in particular, but he covers
the connection of owls and death, and
whether it's not owls, it's other birds too. He's got some stories about other birds too. So so it's if you're making a mistake if you try to. I made the mistake. I tried to cling only to owls, and this other stuff was coming in that was not quite, but it fit. So I'm much more open now to things that don't exactly track with the owl and UFO thing.
Yeah.
Where for a while I was pretty myopic and stuck in that modality.
Got you. Yeah, Peter Fenwick's work is incredible. He, like on end of life experiences and everything around that. And you're aware, I guess, of like work around like animals showing kind of psychic abilities, like and animals with death related phenomena and that kind of thing, like Rupert Sheldrake's work and similar. Yeah. Because I imagine there could be some interesting kind of, like overlaps or connections there, which maybe are worth exploring. Are there any other anecdotes maybe that you wanted to mention that regard to kind of the owl and death or animals and death connection before we kind of move on and talk about some other things?
If I told you more stories, it would be the same story over and over. I got lots of stories. I could tell you the same ones. I mean, it would be once I make the point, it doesn't do any good to hit the nail. Once the nail is sunk, you don't need to beat it in anymore. So, let me just say this. There are 5 things that I found in the research. Mm-hmm. So owls and their connection with UFOs is certainly part of it. This is the owl stuff only. This is coming from my. People ask me, how do you do your research? And I'm like, I get up in the morning and open my email inbox. That's how I do my research. And that's a little bit of a flippant answer, but that's pretty much true. So, and then the other one would be owls and meditation. People meditating will see owls.
Okay.
And then the other one is owls and psychedelics, most particularly mushrooms. I have some accounts with LSD. I have some accounts with ayahuasca, but almost none. A lot of them with mushrooms, and people taking mushrooms in a ritual setting, and either they'll see a real owl will fly into their like I have a story of people who all took mushrooms, sat in the circle in the woods, and an owl flew and landed in the middle of the circle. Or it's like a visionary experience where they're tripping heavily and they're presented with a vision of a 18-foot tall owl that glows and speaks to them and stuff like that. So I take those seriously as part of the research. I recognize fully that some researchers, people have gotten back to me and they do not like the fact that I treat the psychedelic experiences with the same weight that I treat the other reports. Now, okay, so then the other one would be
it's got to be dreams, right?
No, actually, dreams I don't really count. So, but I mean, certainly owls and dreams show up a lot. But owls and shamanic initiation.
Okay.
A young shaman going through the initiation process will see owls. It's really it's consistent.
And that's across cultures and across.
It's well understood in the community of shamans. Yeah. Wow. And then the 5th one would be death, owls and death. Now, so there's 5 things in my research that are showing up, that I'm seeing recognizably as a pattern. Mm-hmm. So it's not, and I call these 5 things highly charged human experiences. So it's not that the owl is connected to the UFO. It's that the owl is connected to the highly charged human experience certainly a UFO sighting would be considered a highly charged human experience, as well as a shamanic initiation, as well as a powerful meditation, as well as a psychedelic experience, as well as, as well as death. So the owl is not connected to the UFO. It is connected to the highly charged human experience.
It's connected to everything I cover with this podcast, basically.
It's funny. I don't have any connection. I don't have any stories. They might be out there. I simply don't have them of owls connected to the near-death experience. It should be, right? Doesn't that feel like?
I was thinking about that while you were talking a bit earlier. Yeah.
It doesn't. I don't have any.
No, I haven't heard it either when going through.
Here's what I do have. People who have had both the UFO experience and an owl experience and a near-death experience. They're going to have powerful owl experiences. So, but I don't have, and I'm guessing it's out there, but unless I see it as a pattern, I got essentially zero at this point. But
fascinating. Wow. There's so much to unpack with this topic. Wow.
It's great. It's messy. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, just like with all of this stuff that kind of pushes the envelope and is on the edges of science, as it were. Like all of this stuff just is constantly bizarre and doesn't seem to fit and is nuanced and complicated and confusing and conflicting even. And just hard to kind of work into our version of reality. What were you going to say?
That's a clue for me. That complexity is a clue for me that this is in every research. So a friend of mine has had UFO contact experiences. His name is Bill. He's funny, and he works for MUFON, and he's open with his UFO experiences and written books and such. So he'll go to a party and he'll be with his wife, and someone will say, "So Bill, what's this UFO thing? What's this UFO thing you're interested in?" And his wife will get right in the middle of him and say, "You got 6 hours? Like, you want to hear the story? You can need 6 hours." So I've started to call it the 6 hour story. Like, if you really want to know, you better be ready to sit there for 6 hours. And every researcher knows what it means to talk to someone or multiple phone calls to get the full story from someone's experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm going back to what percentage, only a couple more of those, and it doesn't have to be exact or anything. What percentage roughly of your files involve people seeing an owl transform into something else, or something else transform into an owl? These kind of themes.
Okay, so the transformation, I've only got a couple where people will actually see it transform. So what you're describing is what's referred to as a screen memory, I went to early on in my studies, or not even my studies, my own personal journey, I guess. I went to a UFO conference, and at the conference they had a UFO support group meeting. It was a closed meeting, and the doors were closed. There was a therapist running the meeting. It was actually Leo. It was Leo Sprinkle was running the meeting. The fellow I talked about that lived in Wyoming, the first researcher I talked to. So he's running the meeting. He's a psychiatrist or psychologist, excuse me. And the meeting was like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. We were all sitting in a circle, and there was one guy he was kind of really uptight, and you could see he was didn't say anything. And at the very end of the meeting, he said, "Hey, I gotta ask him, has anyone here ever had any weird experiences with owls?" And he almost fell out of his chair when pretty much everyone in the room, including me, raised their hand. And then he told this story. He said, I'm a photographer, and here, I'll start this. So he said, I was driving at one night, and there was an owl on the side of the road. And I pulled right up to it, and it was 5 foot tall, 4 foot tall owl. And I rolled my window down, and there's this 4 foot tall owl on the side of the road, and I'm looking at it out my window. I pull right up next to it, and I got this really bad feeling. So I drove home. And then he said, I'm a photographer, and I went to take some pictures of real owls in this nest in a tree, and I'm in the woods, and I've got my camera, and I'm looking through the zoom lens at these owls, and I'm looking at their faces, and I go, I don't think that was an owl on the side of the road. And then he went through hypnotic regression, and the only thing that came up is that the owl was wearing boots.
Yeah.
And there's this, it's a consistent thing that shows up in the research where, and it's not just owls, it's not any number of things. Owls and deer are certainly the top two. And I think any abduction researcher who's looking into this would agree with me on that. But people would drive home or be driving at night. They'll see a 4-foot tall owl on the road. Do you know who Dolores Cannon is?
I do, yeah. I mean, I couldn't tell you right now her entire bio, but I know the name, and she's a UFO researcher, I think, right?
Yeah, she's since passed on, yeah. And she was a really esoteric researcher. Wow, did she dive into some deep waters and use some... But anyway, but she had a powerful owl in the middle of the road experience. And so here, I'm going to back up a little bit. And so Dolores Cannon was a therapist. This is going back, I think, in the early 80s. She was just doing normal family therapy work. She was a hypnotherapist, and she was doing things about weight loss and quitting smoking and reducing stress. And she said this UFO stuff kept on emerging. People would spontaneously tell these UFO stories while under hypnosis. She's like, do I follow this? Do I like go down this road? It's pretty like, do I? So she has a meeting with the group of clinicians she works with at the office. Mm-hmm. And she says, I got to make a decision. Am I going to follow this stuff with the UFO thing? Like, it's showing up in my research or in my clients. So she drives home that night, and there's a 4-foot tall owl in the middle of the road. She got a great big truck. She's in Arkansas. She's in a wooded road. And so she pulls right up to the owl, and the owl looks at her above the hood. I get that account a lot. And let me tell you take the biggest owl in the world in the smallest car, it's not going to be able to look over the hood. Like, they just aren't that big. So, and then it flies down the road, and then she pulls up to it again. And then it flies down the road, and she pulls up to it again. It flies down the road and takes her right, and then it waits at her driveway, and she pulls in her driveway, and her son's at the house. And she said, I saw this 4-foot tall owl on the road. And she said, Mom, there's no such thing as a 4-foot tall owl. So she realizes later that, like, that I don't think that was an owl. So the questions I ask are, what was happening leading up to the event and what changed after? So what happened leading up to the event? She was like, I have to decide, am I going to look into this UFO thing in my research? She undoubtedly did. She's got like 10 books. And she, so, and I know her, I met her a couple of times at conferences, and I actually know her 2 daughters pretty well. So yeah, so there, it's right there. What happened leading up to the event, what changed after. Those are vital in my research. So not other people don't ask those questions, but that's very much what I'm intrigued by. So, and then you say when they transform, I have very few accounts where people see them transform. But was one woman, she's a good friend of mine. She's close to my age, but at the time she was 19 years old, and she was working at a girls' camp in the Northwest. And there was 2 campsites in the forest, in the woods. And it was just, they could lay the tents out here, they could lay the tents out here, and the number of kids, and the way the forest was, and the way the tents fit. So there was a trail that connected the 2 campsites. So she was with some set of girls, and she says, I'm going to go to the next set of campsites. She walks down the trail. She could hear the girls in the background. She could hear them talking and playing in the background. And she turns a corner, full daylight. Now let me back up a little bit. She had been having UFO abduction events. She had seen like gray aliens in her bedroom. She was traumatized. It was hard, rough for her, but everything had always happened at night. So here she is, full daylight. She's walking down the path. She turns the corner. There's a gray alien with the big bald head and the big black eyes, skinny body, standing at the edge of the trail. And she's like astonished, like just thunderstruck. And this thing looks at her, and she looks at it. And now pretty much 100% of the communication that's reported between the beings, this is in the literature, this is people I've talked with, this is well understood, it's all telepathic. Like, the aliens don't talk and move their mouths, like sound doesn't come out of them and you hear it with your ears. It's telepathic communication. So she gets this telepathic like reverberation where this thing basically goes, oh crap, I'm busted, you caught me. And so it looks at her, and she looks at it, and she hears this kind of owl, 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 owl in her mind. And she watches this gray being morph into an owl. And it turns around and walks into the woods. So let me just add, there's another detail. So she said it kind of like, it kind of hovered, it kind of zipped into the woods. And then she went back later and followed where it was standing, and it walked through the grass, the tall grass, and into the woods. But the grass was tall, but there was like a dip. There was like a big dip, like a river, like a drainage or a little trench. So if this being was walking, it would have had to walk down and then walk back up. But that's not what she saw. She saw it like hovercraft, which is such a weird detail, but it's the kind of thing that shows up. So the percentage of people who have seen these beings actually morph, I got almost none, 2 or 3.
Yeah. And
then there's 2 in particular. One is morphing into deer, where someone saw a group of 5 gray beings off their front porch, and the same thing. They looked at her. The deer looked at, the beings looked at. They were kind of like they were surprised that she stepped out onto the porch. She watched them morph into deer, and then the deer walked backwards and around the corner of the house. So that's very rare. Yeah. But the accounts of 4-foot tall owls in the road, like a third of my accounts.
Really?
I'm maybe 25%, somewhere in there, quarter or a third. Yeah.
What do you make of all that? Those are obviously some of the more kind of bizarre. I mean, it's all bizarre in its own way, but they're pretty, out there. Some of those, right? The idea of these giant owls that are taller than any owl that we have on Earth, on the road, and we're sometimes wearing boots or whatever. And how do you process that?
Well, so I talked to a lot of hypnotherapists who are doing this work, and I worked with Bud, and Bud Hopkins, and I know Yvonne Smith pretty well, and so they just under hypnosis they'll ask, someone will say, okay, let's describe the owl in the road, and under hypnosis they'll say, well, it's bald and it has big black eyes and it's got a tight-fitting spacesuit on, and I don't think that's an owl. So they're describing most often. I don't have any. I think I got to be careful here, but it feels like 100% of the reports of those type of things where it turns out to be a gray alien, the gray beings, and so the implication is that those beings either have technology or they have psychic abilities to project into the mind of the observer that instead of seeing like something frightening, like a gray being, an alien, something alien to our reality, to see that in a road at night on a lonely road would be horrifying.
Yeah.
So they take on they use a psychic projection and turn themselves into an owl. Or let's say they create an illusion in the mind of the observer that they are seeing an owl while instead they are looking at a gray being on the road. Now, it could be a deer, it could be a raccoon, it could be a clown, it could be a fireman, and you've got reports of Jesus. I've got reports of people like, Jesus was standing at the foot of my bed, kind of thing. So, and it's not only on a lonely road, it's out a window, it's on the back porch, it's in the driveway. Yeah. So, but once you've heard that story 500 times, you recognize there's something going on. The beings have a way to put a cloak, to put an illusion, to put a screen image into the mind of the observer. So once you wrap your mind around that, it just, go on.
I was just going to say, and the beings in these cases, they kind of stick around on the road. They fly and they follow the car or whatever. And they hang around for a minute before they leave. So you'd think there's some kind of reason, right? Like with the cases regarding the death, it's easy for us to extrapolate and say, it could be some kind of communication or something to do with the deceased, the recently deceased person, loved one of the person that's the percipient. In these cases, it's what's the motivation? Because if it's just, you don't want to be seen, then you transform and then you move away immediately, right? You don't follow the car down the road. What do you think about that?
It's a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah.
It's totally because if it's a gray being, it can't fly. The gray being can't flap its skinny arms and fly.
Yeah.
So what is happening? Yeah, it's a mess. It's like tough to untangle this web. What I can say is that these events are often associated with missing time.
Right. That was going to be one of my next
Yeah.
questions,
So
actually. Yeah. They're kind of, yeah.
so the implication is that they're seeing a gray being on the road.
Mm-hmm.
Like the person is given a amnesia for, let's say, 2 hours. So it's very common that they'll say, oh, I was supposed to be home at midnight and it was 2 a.m. when I finally got home. And that shouldn't have been. Like, I know how long it takes me to get from this point to that point. And so there's this, the implication is that if you're seeing the 4-foot tall owl, there is an abduction event that has just happened or just about to happen. This is very tough to say.
Yeah.
Like individually, case by case, you can guess, you can speculate. Wow, is it tough to actually know what happened? And this includes hypnosis. Hypnosis is controversial in that sense.
Yeah.
So information emerges through hypnosis, and is it true? I know a lot of people who've been hypnotized and say it's true. But I'm really cautious. But what I can say is that the clinicians that I've talked to, the hypnotherapists that I've talked to, at the forefront, they're trying to provide healing for the witness, and there's healing can occur through the hypnosis process. I'm sure there's some cases where people's lives get scrambled and messed up by a hypnosis event. I have not talked to anyone who feels that. I've heard reports and read reports of people who have said that they had a hypnosis session and it messed them up because it was so terrifying. But I find it's almost just the opposite. In the majority of cases, the people who do go through hypnosis to come to terms with their UFO contact event, it's a healing experience for them.
Yeah. And so those cases, you look at them as screen memories. That's the way you kind of interpret them. Yeah. Okay. And obviously you mentioned the clown, right? I can't, like, I have to ask about that. Like, what was that case all about? And again,
that's all over. There's lots of clown.
There's lots of clown cases, really.
Yeah.
What on earth do we do with that? Because, like, surely if there's, let's just speculate. There's something here interacting with us on our planet. They've got the hang of how to, be doing their business while we don't really have too much awareness. So they like, okay, owls, deer, okay, logical. Unless the clown thing's happening at a circus, like, what do we do with that? Did they just make a mistake?
Like a clown? That's like what about the, like, fear of clowns is like is a recognizable malady that people have. So what does that say? It's like, where did that come from? So yeah, I'm yeah. So and like little kids, like, Fred Flintstone will show up, or like like Tony the Tiger will show up, like a cartoon character will show up in the bedroom. It's weird. Yeah, it's a mess. It must
be something to do with the. I mean, again, I think must be, as if I can make any kind of claims here, but it seems like it could be something to do with maybe the interaction of the percipent's consciousness, and maybe, yeah. I don't know. That's
the implication is that the being, the same way we can get on our computer and like, I gotta find that file. There's a file on my computer. I gotta find it. So you search, dink, and you have a search engine. So it feels like, I'm using a computer metaphor here, but it feels like the beings instantaneously can go tap into the mind of the observer, instantaneously pull out the correct screen memory for that individual.
Yeah.
There's a story of a woman who was basically vacuuming her house and full daylight, and then she's like overcome with fatigue, and she sits down on the couch, and she's had like paranormal experiences and seeming contact experiences in her life, and then the door opens up and her husband walks in, and he's not acting like her husband. Something else is taking place, and if I remember this correctly, now I'm drawing a blank on the details of that story, but to have like a family member or a husband show up, even dead relatives showing up, could be a screen memory. Gets very interesting, because there seems to be, there's a researcher named Joshua Cutchin. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
I'm talking to him very soon, actually. Yeah.
He's wonderful. He's wonderful. So he's done a lot of death studies, and that dead relatives showing up in the context of a UFO event, that could say, oh, they're the spirit entity of the dead relative has access to this alternate reality that we would call onboard UFOs, or they're using a screen memory. It gets very tough to parse these out. That's why I go back to the story. Like, all you can really do at a certain level, at a certain point, all you can really do is just tell the story unfiltered, and then just try to take that mood in the same way you would like a parable. You don't, a parable or a Zen koan, let's say, like there's these stories that take place that we can't solve.
Yeah.
But we can get the mood or the feel of those stories, on an individual basis.
Yeah. Yeah, we can like search for meaning, and people are going to get different interpretations. But,
exactly.
There's something. Again, I have so many kind of like questions jumping around my head, but let's move on to another one. So you mentioned a lot of those cases where the owl turns up in the road. It also feature missing time. So how many of your cases overall, like the rough 2000, how many of them do you think involve missing time or slowing time or having, time warped in some manner? How many approximately of the 2000 involve something with time?
Ooh, that's tough. Half?
Yeah. So quite a few, again,
quite a few. I mean, whether it's 60% or 40%, it's tough to know, but I'm anecdotally half.
Yeah. And is it normally missing, or does it vary? Is it sometimes?
Oh, it's all over. It's so weird. It gets so weird. Yeah. It's all, like I got stories where this is very common for people to have, and it's interesting. They'll say that I was driving with a friend. I was driving from Boston to New York City with a friend, and we got in this wonderful conversation. Oh my God, we talked about spiritual things, and then we pull in and we get to the house in New York, and my wife says, I thought you left. What are you doing here? And it's like, we just got done with the drive. And it's like, no, you left Boston at 10. It's 10:15 now. You didn't get here in 15 minutes. So there's it gets weird. Yeah, there's all kinds of time disruptions that don't follow the classic, I should have been home at midnight, but it's 2 a.m.
Yeah.
It's all scrambled up.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. And again, I'm just kind of I'm allowing these questions that are just popping into my head. So you're probably aware that Danny Sheehan has recently been talking about, like these 5 species or multiple species of non-human being that he thinks are interacting with us here, and the small greys are one of these species, but allegedly there are multiple. So you've mentioned so far that these cases frequently or sometimes feature a grey or multiple grey beings. Does it sometimes include other types of being, potentially ET or non-human being, or is it always these small greys?
So this is so at the top of this, like if there was like the greys, in my opinion, would be at the top of the list. And then there's, I'm not sure exactly what he's listing. I can guess pretty strongly it would be, and then in some form or another, it would be the mantis beings, giant praying mantis. I got a lot of giant praying mantis, like giant, like somebody wakes up and there's like a 9-foot tall, like it basically can't stand straight up in the bedroom because it's too tall to stand up, a praying mantis. And then
get out of the bedroom then, praying, my goodness me.
That's terrifying. It's terrifying. Yeah.
So the praying mantis, the small greys. I think the tall greys is one Danny mentioned as well. Don't know.
And those are often sort of folded into the short greys. Yeah.
Right.
So the tall greys, and they have a different personality type completely than the short greys.
Right.
Where the short greys tend to be described, and this doesn't make it true, but this is just anecdotally after consuming monstrous amounts of this research. Including, a lot of that involves reading other people's books, but the small greys would be like a worker, like a bee, like a drone, a hive mind, like they're the workers. And then the taller greys, oftentimes they'll say like, there's nothing, you can't see anything that defines them as a woman, but people say, oh, it's a feminine energy like this. So the taller beings, often referred to as women or feminine, would be working with the smaller grays.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then reptilians, giant reptiles.
So you have them as well.
Yeah. And then beings of light, just amorphic light beings that look like a special effect where they're just glowing beings of light.
Maybe that's the overlap with NDEs.
Yeah. Oh, there's lots of overlap with NDE in the UFO contact experience. But I have not found any overlap between
with the owls.
The owls in the near-death experience, but there's lots of overlap with. There's a researcher named Ray Hernandez who did a statistical study of a big number, and he has some number. I wish I could bring it to the forefront, but he has the actual statistical number of the people who claim UFO abduction or UFO contact. He doesn't like the word abduction, but UFO contact, and then have also had near-death experiences. Both of them should be an astronomically tiny number of the overall population, right? How many people really have a near-death experience? Pretty small. How many people really get abducted? Pretty small. And then to have both of them have the same experience would be like minuscule. Like they shouldn't even overlap. The two modalities are so rare. But but people who have UFO contact it's very common for them to also have a near-death experience. Wow. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these experiences potentially seem to open people up to have other similar types of experience, right? Even though we have no kind of explanatory framework for that. But so all these different types of beings and potentially others, they come up in the reports with owls, like the reptilian beings, and all these other types of entity. They come up in these same reports, or is it the owls specifically with the small grays?
I'm going to be, wow, it would be really, so like I'm kind of, I would say that it's the owls across the board seem to show up in connection with these other, it doesn't, whatever, the owls aren't picky about what beings they're showing up for.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Wow. Is there anything else you've gleaned from the data and stuff that you wanted to talk about right now before we again continue to move forward?
Yeah, this is one. So are you familiar? You know what Reiki therapy is?
Yeah. I did an episode on that. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. So Reiki. So this is people who have. So the people who are finding me. It says, I want to hear your owl stories. They're most often connected to UFOs. So the people who have owl and UFO experiences. Mm-hmm. I would argue that half of them are Reiki healers.
Really?
Yeah.
Half of the people
half
having 50%, the UFO and owl
who've had UFO and owl experiences. Half of those people are Reiki therapists, and if they're not Reiki therapists, they're doing another very similar form of like psychic healing.
Yeah. Even if it was like 10-15%, that would be enormous. If it's close to 50, that's like,
I'm doing this
wild,
anecdotally, but I don't even like, so when I talk to people, like I talk to people on the phone, right? So you talk on the phone, I get a clipboard, I write some notes down. I don't write much down. I want their phone number, the date of the call, and a couple key things in case they ever call back. I can I've forgotten more owl stories than anyone else on earth has probably ever heard. So, but I have to, I just in the corner when I talk to people, I just write Reiki in the corner, and I just wait. I just wait. We're on the phone. I just wait for him to say it. I'm like, oh, I'm a Reiki healer. Like, oh, I kind of knew that. Yeah. So or I expected that. So and I started to ask that in conferences. Like, okay, like I'll say, okay, who's had a UFO contact experience? Raise their hand. You're like, oh, who's had an owl experience? Raise their hand. Who in the room is a Reiki healer? Raise their hand. Who had their hand up all 3 times? And then it's like, it's wild. It's like, I don't know what to think. Like, the implication is that and it's all, it's like, there's like kind of a caricature of the Reiki healer, right? Mm-hmm. The kind of, they live in Sedona. They've got like big turquoise earrings and they listen to new age music. But I'm finding like, as a truck driver, I just got inspired to take up Reiki healing, so it's like, wow, I don't know what. Yeah.
The person I spoke to that like does the Reiki healing, she's like a scientist, she's got PhD. She's really cool. She's down to earth. She goes at these things seriously. She like goes she looks at these things through the scientific lens, and that's how she operates. But from talking to her, she's saying, yeah, when she does like do a healing with somebody, she'll get random intrusive, like bits of information that she's picking up psychically that she would never have. Like, she's not looking for that. Same thing with like after death communications, like in a kind of mediumship almost sense. Like when she's doing a Reiki healing, she can have things like that pop in, like something to do with after death communication. She had all sorts of weird things like that. And apparently seems to be common with Reiki. I think that she also talked about a crazy experience she had with like potentially communicating with some kind of non-human intelligence, which she said she'd never shared it before. I think she felt a bit like, nervous sharing that, but I don't know, like this, it seems bizarre. It's almost like it's some kind of, doorway to, as we said, some of these things make it more likely to have other experiences, but maybe Reiki's like, I don't know.
I agree. So here are the questions I ask is what happened leading up to the event? What happened after? And then I ask, has your spirituality changed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I ask, what are your psychic abilities?
Mm-hmm.
And then I ask, what are your healing abilities? So these 5 questions. And given those questions, you can kind of interpret what's been pouring into my data pool, like that I'm asking those questions. Yeah. I don't ask like the UFO researcher would ask, like which way was the UFO flying? And was it flying north to south? Or did you contact an airport? Could you like I don't want, like once you've heard those, people say, yeah, so it's like I'm drawn to that. So if like people like, okay, let's go to the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Metal spaceship comes to another planet. It's filled with little scientists. They land, they abduct someone, they do medical exams, they put the person back. Why would that person then suddenly become a Reiki healer?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why would an owl show up?
Yeah. And then why would they have more precognitive dreams going forward?
Exactly. Psychic dreams, why would they? Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're agreed that none of this stuff makes sense. Yeah.
But it's seductive.
Yeah.
The mystery is seductive. Like I'm like, and I'm not looking at the totality of the mystery, right? The mystery goes from like, oh, it's got government conspiracies way over here, and it's got burn marks in the farmer's field over here, and there's researchers studying implants but I'm looking at owls, like this thin. I didn't invent the owl thing. It's in the literature. Like there's lots of books. You get a book about UFOs, there might be a paragraph or 2 sentences about owls. It's in there. People I'm the one who went obsessive about it. So I'm not looking at the big totality. I'm looking at this little thin sliver of the research, and I'm pulling on this little thin thread. And if it wasn't interesting, I would have dropped it ages ago. But what I'm finding is that thin thread is so rich in its mythic power. Mm-hmm. I'm like, and it's so that kind of mythic power, that kind of campfire story, that kind of parable, that kind of dream language is what I've always loved. I've always loved that kind of account. So I'm asking, I want to hear all the stories. They're arriving, and I'm like, I'm so enamored by the power of these stories. I will also say, and I've said this, I think I said this earlier, like I am not objective. Like I am totally subjective. I'm researching myself. I want answers because I've had these experiences. So I'm not a scientist who's trying to be, free of any bias. I'm awash in bias. So just as anyone listening to me, just and it should be pretty obvious, but anyone listening to me, just recognize that I'm not playing the role of a non-biased scientist. I'm playing the role of a completely biased experiencer, struggling with my own experiences.
Yeah. Some of the cases you said involve meditation. You said that's one of these 5 things where you see. So just again, I don't want to spend too long on that, but just because time is flying by but just spend a couple of minutes. Just tell me what you've noticed there. How many cases do you have like that feature meditation?
It's a smaller number, but it's a pattern for sure. Yeah. So I got a woman sat down. This is blending a few, right? So there's a few things going on here. This woman is a friend of my partner at the time. This was in upstate New York, and her name is Suzanne. And Suzanne contacts my partner Andrea, and we're like drinking coffee. It's winter time. We're in front of the fire. We build a fire in the morning, and we're sitting in front of the fire. And Suzanne says, like, "Can you look at this picture of this owl? Is this owl sick?" She knew I was like did owl research.
Yeah.
And I look at this picture. It's a barred owl, which is a pretty common North American owl. It's on a like camera picture, like on their back porch in the winter. So it's like sitting on a chair in the snow right out the window. And I'm looking at this thing like, how am I supposed to know whether it's like, looks fine to me? What's up? What's the story? And she says, well, and she tells the story. She said, I was meditating, and I was dealing with the death of my mother. My mother died a few years ago, and I still miss her. It was her birthday, my mother's birthday, and I was dealing with the death of my mother. She'd been gone for a few years, and so I was meditating. So I sat down with my eyes closed, and that was my intention, to just better understand or come to terms. So she opens her eyes, and in line with her is the back window. Like if she had been a little bit like this, she wouldn't have seen it. If she would have been like this, she wouldn't have seen it. She was in line with the back window, and there looking in the window was this owl. And that was the owl she took the picture of. And I was like, it was funny this. We have the back and forth text messaging. And I since talked to her at length, but we had the back and forth text messaging. So it's all time stamped and everything. And I said, like, what? You open that window and you talk to that owl as if it's your mom. I just said it as plain as it can be. So she did. She said, then the owl like looked at me, and it was just stayed there, but then it flew off. It stayed in a tree, and it was in the tree for the rest of the day. And I said, how you doing lately? And she said, well, I found it like it was there. The presence of it there all day on her birthday really was therapeutic, really was helpful. And so she didn't say her grieving went to zero, but she found it profoundly healing.
Yeah.
So there's a meditation story. I have lots of stories like that. I have one story of a woman who went into the forest to find her spirit name. Her intention, what was going on leading up to the event. There's no UFO in this story. This woman did have UFO experience. She had actually a near-death experience too. Her name is Denise Lynn, and she's part Native American, so she wanted to find her spirit name. So she went into the forest, and she said she had her eyes closed, and then the forest noise just like went to zero, totally quiet. That's UFO stuff. That's like the Oz factor. And then she said she kind of opened her eyes, and like on a branch so close to her that it like, whoa, like was a great horned owl staring right at her.
Wow.
And wow. Like that's never, I mean, that's that. I have that story. That one's a pretty dramatic form, but I've got lots of story about people meditating outside, and it's usually the owl's a little farther away, but that's one where it was like right on the branch, like within arm's length of her face.
Fascinating. Yeah. Again, I find meditation is something that links all of these phenomena. Like the more I research and the more I learn, the more I find, wow, it has links to kind of, everything. Even in places where it's kind of hard to get my head around, why it seems to be like the key to all of it. Like we said about Reiki, I guess there's something in common with, maybe you put yourself into a headspace that's along the lines of a meditative, like altered state of consciousness. And so,
those 5 things, those are all very mystical. UFO contact, meditation that's a mystical act. Psychedelics, a mystical act. Shamanic initiation is a mystical act. And death is a mystical transformation. I mean, something is going on. I'm not agnostic about this stuff. I'm like, I feel very strongly that there's an afterlife, and I believe in reincarnation, and this is coming from the research, just being flooded with so many stories. Yeah,
absolutely. And the meditation thing even comes up in reincarnation. Like there's one thing that always stuck with me from reading Jim Tucker's book before. So it's not based on loads of data, this specific thing that I'm going to say, but so it's quite, it's hard to say with any certainty because there's so few cases to base this on. But it was something along the lines of, if the previous personality was a meditator, they're more likely to somebody's more likely to remember that life at some point. So a child is more likely to have memories of a life where the person was a meditator than not. And then the amount of meditation that the previous personality did, then in those cases where they were more of a meditator, the children would have more clear and detailed memories of the previous life. So again, it's just like,
oh wow.
Like there's again not like not hundreds of cases to say like, oh yeah, there's a definite pattern there, but from this very small sample size of meditators within the past life memory database, yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, it lines up. It's like, yeah, the more you meditate, the more you remember, or the more likely you are to be. It's hard to draw the conclusion in that sense, but there's something there.
That's the trouble with this whole thing. That's why it's like, I'm very cautious to be pragmatic or dogmatic about these things, because you're constantly on that slippery slope, So the way I say it, like I can't explain the mechanism behind what you just described, but I certainly can say how it makes me feel. Like that makes sense in my. Oh, I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, and as I said, the more I look into it, I'm sure it's the same for you, the more it kind of fits, and the more it's like, oh yeah, all of this stuff lines up, even though we still can't make sense of it to an extent. It all kind of just, the picture starts to, I don't know, I'm probably rambling.
No,
what percentage?
This is you're addressing exactly the challenges of these studies. That's why the nuts and bolts researchers. I've talked to nuts and bolts researchers, and like, I don't want to go into that consciousness stuff. I don't want to go into that abduction stuff.
Yeah.
And they basically say it's too messy. Like they want to go to the burn mark in the farmer's field and measure it with a ruler.
But we also have that, right? Like in psychical research, we have the lab studies, we have the statistics and the meta-analysis of the statistics. So like, you don't have to, I don't think anymore, I hate the word woo, but you don't need to be open to woo to look into consciousness and psychic phenomena. You can be very much, I need data, I need science, I need statistics, and it's there, right? For people that are like that, people that can't kind of think of anything weird, which used to be me before I went into the research.
And me too, yeah. So I mean, it was like wow, like stuff crumbles once you really like you could stay in that closed off mind, and the only way to do that would be to ignore or push away that data. And say, I'm only going to focus on this data over here, not this messy data over here. And I'm doing the same thing where the way I address it, I feel like my research is more along the lines of a journalist, where I'm like, people tell me wild stories. I cannot confirm what may or may not have happened, but I can put it in a book and I can quote them accurately. And what I very much do, and this is actually hard work, it takes up a lot of time. Before I publish someone's account, I say to that person, you need to read your account. Anything that I need to change, I want this to be accurate. What do I need to change? And oftentimes it's very simple. It's like, oh, you said that happened in the morning. Actually, it happened in the afternoon. Like, great, I'll change that. Those simple things like that. But I need to tell people's stories accurately. The veracity of what truly happened, I'll never know. But I can say that if I put a story in a book, you might only get one story, but underneath that are 10 similar stories and I think, other researchers have said the same thing. It'd be like, it's not going to do any good to tell the same story 100 times from 100 different witnesses. All you need to read one or two examples, and once you've made the point, you move on.
Yeah. Yeah. What percentage, again, I'm going back to the what percentage, how many of your cases roughly do you include owls making, or other animals making sounds, like the sounds that we would expect them to make in nature, in the physical reality, whatever? I don't know how we're going to talk
like a hooting owl?
Yeah, or like, whatever kind of noise owls make. Yeah, the various noises. How many of the cases include, the noises that would be expected to come with an encounter?
Like deer don't make noise, right?
No,
so they don't. Yeah, I mean they do, but it's pretty. I mean, I
wouldn't know what noise they make.
Yeah, they do make it, but I mean it's like mostly just like, I don't know, it sounds like a lamb or something. But and then but the deer will make footsteps in the forest and stuff like that.
And people say they hear that kind of thing.
So I'm convinced that there's real owls, physical owls, real birds showing up in context with the experience. I am the story I told at the beginning with Kristen in the mountains of Wyoming, those were real birds. I have no doubt about it. They were landed at our feet. They were right there. They were tiny, they were cute, they were not a screen memory. I may be wrong, but that's certainly how I feel like I can say that with some authority.
Mm-hmm.
So once you've heard the screen memory story 500 times, and then why did a real owl get placed in someone's experience? Yes, I got lots of owls hooting, like, oh, I heard the hooting of an owl. Lots of people have so the hooting of the owl is same as an owl sighting, in the sense that there's an owl in the backyard. There might be no lights in the yard. The hooting comes out of a tree.
Yeah. Someone commented on the YouTube of my interview with Diana Walsh Pasulka, where obviously your stuff came up. They said that, and it was something I've heard before. I remember this from when I was learning about the case myself, the Ariel School case. They said they said in the comment that one of the children at Ariel School reported hearing like a flute-like sound just before seeing the UFO or the being, one of the beings. So they mentioned they heard this flute-like sound, and the person that commented on the YouTube said a flute-like sound could sound like an owl, which I suppose it could in some context. So what do you make of that? And have you kind of come across that in that? Have you picked up on that in the Ariel School case before? And are you aware of anything along those lines?
Oh, the music sound. Oh yeah. That's more reported in. I'm seeing the book Wonders in the Sky behind you there. That's that's Albeck and Vallée wrote that book, and I think that would be a great resource for. And I think it's even Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, the comparative mythologist, talks about, the person walking down the path will hear music. Sometimes it's buzzing. Sometimes it's not sound at all, but it's like, like a big bass speaker. You can feel it inside. So there might be no sound at all, but you can feel the what would be a musical presence. So that shows up more. I'm being really cautious here because I don't have good examples I can pick out right now, but that would be more, I wouldn't want to say ancient folkloric traditions. So someone, walking through the fields of Ireland would hear music, and then they would realize that they were with the fairies, or like an angelic sighting, they would hear music. So that overlaps other lore. I'm just anecdotally trying to do that from memory. I do remember very clearly Jacques Vallée talking about that music in some cases. He made a point. He told a story that sounded very much like a modern abduction case. And then at the end, he just says, oh, this happened in 1518 in a village in Germany, and this is the report. I'm making those numbers up. But that was the way he told the story. So it's part of the lore for sure. Yeah.
And you mentioned ancient folklore. I was going to ask you about that anyway. So yeah, how do owls crop up in like ancient mythology and ancient folklore? Obviously, I've seen a bunch of the ways when I was researching for this interview, but is there anything that jumps to your mind that you always kind of think of in terms of how it relates to the contemporary cases?
So in ancient man would have understood owls being flying in the forest at night. Right. So mythologically, the owl flies in the darkness, in the forest. I mean, the forest is a mythological construct. It's symbolic of the darkness, of challenge. So the forest, right, you would go into the forest. Bilbo Baggins went into the forest, in the beginning of The Hobbit, so the forest is like a symbolic trope that we can all understand archetypally. And so the owl flies in complete darkness in the forest. To ancient man, that would have been magic, right? So we have the electric light bulb. The night has lost its drama for us.
Yeah, we have a torch on all of our phones, right?
Exactly. We have where the night we're no longer is associated in. Just a couple generations ago, like my grandfather was born in 1885. So I knew someone who lived in a world without electric lights. So it's very recent in human history that the night and the darkness has lost its symbolic message. So the owl, like we can say that the owl can see in the dark because of evolutionary issues with its, its highly developed eyes, but it would have been magic to ancient man.
Yeah.
So the owl very quickly becomes synonymous with the forest, to traveling to the other realms. So the owl flies through the darkness and enters the land of our ancestors, the land of the gods, the land of the dead, that other realm. The owl symbolically has access to that other realm. You take that one step further, the owl returns with a message. Right? That's the ancient lore. The owl is messenger.
Kind of like the title of your book.
Ruthie said it. I was blessed to have such a beautiful creature be the messenger of my father. She did not have to compose that. She didn't have to reference ancient, books on symbolism. She said it as plainly can be. She gave the ancient lore of the owl in one sentence. So the owl comes back with a message. Now, that's ancient stuff. Modern times, present day, we have Harry Potter. Harry Potter has an owl that delivers the mail. It's perfect. It's not hidden in some dusty mythological book in the back of some academic library. It's at the forefront of our popular culture. It's on every bookshelf in pretty much every house in the English-speaking world. An owl as messenger. It is alive right now. The ancient mythology is alive right now. When I do this talk, I have a slideshow and I have a picture of Harry Potter with his owl Hedwig on
Hedwig,
yeah, Hedwig on his wrist. And then I do the next slide is J.K. Rowling, or J.K. Rowling is how she pronounced it, but it says O-W-L right in her name.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
And
I see what you mean.
It's
Rowling,
right there, it's right in her name. So,
and it's the qualification in Harry Potter, right? The owls, it's like the A levels, some kind of thing in school. It's one of the qualifications they do. The OWLS. I don't know.
I've never read the books actually. So
yeah, I remember that. I read them a long time ago, but yeah, it's something else.
So, and when I have the OWL in the J.K. Rowling's name, I get a little laugh out of it. I say, don't start a new religion on this one. This is more an example how my quirky mind works rather than, but at the same time, I'm delighted by these subtle, playful clues.
Yeah. And in terms of historic accounts that match up with contemporary accounts, have you found many of those in the literature or in the archives? I don't know. Like, have you found any, really old accounts that just maybe that even feature UFOs and owls? I don't know.
Ooh, I'd have to think for a little bit. I'm sure I have, but I got to be careful with that. Yeah, I'm not sure.
None coming to mind right now, but you think you have.
I mean, there's owls all over ancient literature.
Yeah.
Bible, owls are all over Greek myths and stuff like that. It's like, it's there in the mythology.
Yeah.
And symbolically, the owls in the Bible, for instance, are pretty dark. They're the same set piece that we have in a little kids show, right? So if you want to have a spooky scene, right? The kids are walking through the forest and it's dark and spooky. There'll be an owl hooting. There's nothing paranormal going on. Someone in the editing room says, "Oh, let's make this thing spooky."
Like the wolf howl kind of thing, right?
Pardon?
Like the wolf howl in the same kind of scenes.
Exactly, the wolf howl or creaky door. There's all kinds of things that we associate. So, and when you read, there's 17 points in the Bible where owls show up, and you read them, and it I can't find any like underlying myth or like theme there, except it's like it plays out like it's saying like there's a barren landscape home to owls. It's basically saying it's spooky. So right. That's been with us right from the dawn of man, I'm convinced.
Yeah, that kind of idea of like the harbinger, the bad omen, that kind of thing again.
Exactly.
although to so many people, as you've said, in the contemporary accounts, they are the opposite of a harbinger of bad things. They're like, they make people feel good, and they bring, peace and recovery, healing.
I certainly included in my book some accounts of owls in dark, frightening accounts, though what I found is that those are far outnumbered by the sort of, and I don't like to use the word benevolent or I mean, people ask, are owls good or bad? And I'm like, oh, that's a tough one. Like,
depends on the owl, right?
Yeah. Depends on the event. And what I can say is the owls the owls represent a challenge.
Yeah.
Right. So you get confronted with an owl story, you might have some hard work to do. Right. So, and the challenge doesn't make it bad. It might be difficult, but it doesn't, hard work doesn't mean it's bad. And then, I think I'm like heartened by these owl accounts. Like, I did not expect to write a book that had such a benevolent kind of mood to it, where these so it's often of the people who have the UFO contact experience often go through like a dark night of the soul, very, very challenging, but that struggling with these issues can be a part of someone being much more spiritual, much more well-rounded, and and that was a surprise to me when I undertook this research, because I thought it was going to be kind of dark, and it did not turn out to be that way.
Yeah. I wonder, like, if lots of people see them as they're going through a kind of spiritual awakening, or that kind of thing. I mean, again, we've said the parallels with meditation and other similar experiences. I've got a couple of questions here from one of my patrons, Jimmy. Sure. Jimmy the Earthling. He was one of the first people that really wanted me to get you on the show, so he's a big fan of your work. He says, Mr. Clelland, what is the strangest story you could relay? So I got two questions from Jimmy. That's the first one. What's the strangest story you could relay? And if it's not a clown, then it's going to be pretty strange, right?
So I got a lot of, I mean, they're all really strange.
Yeah.
So here, I'll tell you, there's a couple of them. So, a woman, Jessica, gets a hold of me. I love this story. And Jessica's like, we're Facebook friends. She shows me pictures of her cat and, like roller skating parties and stuff like that. So it's like, she's like this real person, and so Jessica sends me this letter. She said, she was lying in bed. Said I was in kind of just that kind of transitional phase, just between wake and sleep. And I looked out the window, and there was an owl on a branch looking in at me. And then a laser beam shot down from the heavens, hit the owl in the head, and then its third eye opened up, and a blue beam went from the owl's third eye into my third eye, and I was completely downloaded with information. Whoa. I was like, okay, like that's like, and then, so as I was, my partner Andrea and I was living in upstate New York when I got this story. And so as I got that story, it was right around the same time, I'm not sure, right within weeks, let's say. I'm at the house in full daylight, wintertime. Andrea pulls into the house. We lived in this beautiful house. Oh my gosh, this wonderful old farmhouse. And it was on this forested spot. And we ran an inn. We ran like a bed and breakfast. And she says, Mike, come out right now. There's an owl in the tree. Bring the camera. So I grab the camera and I go out there. So I'm tall. She's about this height. So I'm standing right behind her. And there's this owl on a branch. It's a barred owl. It's cute and fluffy. It's all happy. And it was a sweet, wonderful sighting. And it was interesting because she pulled in and she had to park in a different spot. There was another car in the parking, where she usually parks. So she just parked. So she was facing into the forest where she would have been facing the house. So she would not have seen it unless that car was, something was kind of odd that she was parked there. And then we're looking at it. And so I'm standing above her. I'm taking pictures of the owl. I've got pictures of this owl. And she says, uh-oh, something weird's happening. She said time stopped. Didn't stop for me. She said, time stopped. She locked eyes with this owl. The owl was looking right at us. And they're very stoic. They just sit in this frozen pose. And so so the owl, she said, and then the owl there was like a magenta halo around the owl, and she sort of described it, like those Hindu paintings of a Indian deity that will just be surrounded by like a glowing, brightly lit halo. So she said that, and I did a rendering of it, and I had to sit with her. Okay, is this how it was? It was like this, and so it was less the halo was around. I think the halo was more around the head of the owl. I'm trying to remember this now. I have the illustration, and so I'm taking pictures of this owl live, click, 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 as she's saying, "Oh, there's a magenta halo around this owl." I never saw anything. The pictures don't show anything, but this mimicked. And she said I got a download. She said I was totally hit with the download. So I did this kind of thing where I said, "Okay, Andrea, you write. How would you define download? What happened? What do you mean download?" And she wrote like 3 sentences. And I got a hold of Jessica, and I said, "Jessica, how would you define download?" And they essentially said the exact same thing. I was flooded with information. I cannot access this information, but there will be a day when I will be able to access information.
Oh, that's what they both said, that they didn't
almost
know
word for
exactly what
word
information they got.
They don't know. This is again
Wow.
part of the mystery. People say this all the time. I got a download, and like, what does that mean? But it's a physical sensation, or a I guess physical. I mean, we're having sensation. The sensation is a physical thing. So both women were having these things. Now I went into the house, and I'd been trying to get a hold of a shaman. His name is Sequoia Trueblood. He's a shaman from Canada, and he had a quote that I wanted to ask him about, and he worked with John Mack. Sequoia Trueblood did, and so I had been trying to reach him. It wasn't that easy, and so I walk into the house, and I got the message that Sequoia Trueblood just called. So he had called my house as I was outside looking at an owl that was glowing magenta for Andrea, but not for me. And so I went in and told him this whole story and said, just minutes ago, there was an owl in the yard, and I was looking at it, and then the phone rings and it's you. And he laughed. He said, "Oh, that does not surprise me at all. Like, basically, this is the kind of thing that a shaman would look for in real life. They would look for these moments punctuated by these mythic creatures."
Wow.
So I got a lot of weird ones. I can go on and on if you want weird stories. I'm not going to run out of weird stories. So,
I mean, I could sit here all day and listen to them. Maybe we'll circle back depending on how we get on with some questions. But yeah, I could literally sit here for hours and listen to all of them, not just the super weird ones, but they're all fascinating. I could just let you just go on hundreds. But you nailed that one with strange. That's definitely strange. Like, I'm not even going to ask what we do with that or how we like deal with that one.
Oh, to tell that story properly takes. I mean, it just goes on and on. And there's synchronicity after synchronicity connected with this story. It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all there is to do is to listen to it and just bear it in mind. Just as another reference point. Wow. So part B from Jimmy. What are the strangest recurring aspects from multiple accounts that kind of come up in multiple accounts? And thank you for your time.
Well, I would say that the Reiki thing is one that just fascinates me. Like, I can kind of wrap my head around it, like, oh yeah, like that makes sense in some form, but I can't articulate logically why it makes sense. So the recurring.
You said clowns recur as well, actually.
Well, the clowns are a smaller number. I mean, that's and a lot of that is coming more from the research that I'm finding in books rather than from my own accounts. Well, the transformative experience where people are changed, people will say like, oh, I had this thing, I had an owl experience, I had a UFO experience, and then then I had a spiritual awakening. So that shows up. So if there's going to be a theme, it's like a form of spiritual awakening that's associated with these owl and UFO events. I actually was at a conference, and that's a bold thing to say. Like, I have a slide, black screen, white letters. You click the thing and it's pick up on the big screen, and standing on stage, I can point to the screen and it says spiritual awakening. And then I say, it's a pattern. It seems to be a pattern that people who have these experiences also have a spiritual awakening. That's bold. And I remember being at a conference and I was like, can I really say that? Should I, like, that's like, I kind of see it as a pattern. I've since talked to other researchers And they said, oh yeah, it's a pattern. But at the time I was like, oh, I'm going to, so I said, I could just take that slide. I was having the thought, I could just take that slide out. It's on my laptop. I just push load up that slide, click the delete button, the slide's gone. Mm-hmm. And as I'm having that thought, this guy comes up to me and said, Mike, I love your research. I read your book, and I just want to say, I had an experience with an owl and a UFO, and it led to a spiritual awakening. And I was like, oh, wow. I guess I don't have to delete that frame, So that's the kind of thing where I trust these synchronicities. Yeah. So if there's a pattern that I find fascinating, it's that there's a spiritual awakening, and that's what I ask: is how has your spirituality changed? And so what I'm asking, in a sense, is have you had a spiritual awakening? It's very consistent. It's a funny term. Other people will use different words, a Kundalini awakening, or I started studying Buddhism or something like that. So it's very common.
Yeah. And again, it's another kind of similarity or something that has in common with near-death experiences and other experiences along the same lines, where after having that, people will have distinct changes, marked changes in their personality and their outlook and their attitude and their beliefs and everything along those lines. I guess if there are any other really bizarre cases that you wanted to go into now, maybe let's just do it before we move on. Like if there's any that are kind of burning that you have on the edge of your tip of your tongue.
So here's I'll do it. There's a woman named Karis Melina Brown. She's a good friend of mine. And she contacted me and she said, I saw an owl. I got to tell you this story. I actually recorded this. I'm so glad I recorded her telling the story. So she was going on a hike, and she said, she's very spiritual. She has a website, and she does YouTube videos about spirituality. She's very true in her own, like I know her pretty well. Like it's not an act. She really, this is her. So she's walking on the trail, and she goes, oh, this is going to be the day I'm going to see an alien. Like she'd had all these events in her life that imply UFO contact, but she really said, I'm going to see an alien today. Today's the day I'm going to see an alien. She said she was walking down the trail, and I'm going to be very careful to see, she's a striking woman. And she said people would pass her on the trail and they wouldn't look at her. It's like she didn't exist. It's like she was invisible. And then she said, she had a voice in her head, said like, oh, you have to leave the trail. Get off the trail, step off the trail. So she steps off the trail, like go through the bushes here. Like, okay, now walk a little around. We'll go around the corner and sit on that rock. So she went and she sat on this rock, and she heard the voice that said, no, it's a little left to the left, not that far left, a little back right. Oh, so she kind of positions herself on the rock, and she's sitting there. Like, what am I doing? And then she looks ahead, and there's like kind of a bushes and stuff in front of her. And through the tunnel of there's a little opening in the bushes. And she sees these eyes looking back at her, and it's a great horned owl. Now, Karis had been immersed in fairy research at that point. She did a lot of fairy research into fairy lore, and she looks at this owl, and she says, she thinks, I think she might have said it out loud. She said, are you an alien or are you a fairy? And then in her mind, she hears, why can't I be both? You're both. And I know her pretty well. And I'm like, fairy, alien, like, I could, like, she personifies that. It's not like she is. She's very much a real person and stuff. But wow, what a wonderful line to be delivered. And then she went on and talked for about the next 45 minutes about essentially leaving normal reality and being taken into an alternate reality. It sounded like she was tripping on LSD, and I asked, like, wait a minute, like, are they doing any drugs this afternoon or anything? And she's like, nope. She told the most mystical, trippy, tumbling, wild story, sitting facing this owl in the woods. Totally spiritual, mystical stuff.
Wow. Yeah,
I got a lot of stories. That's a good example, but I got a lot of stories with that flavor.
Yeah. Wow. What about dreams then? We kind of touched on it a bit earlier. How do you perceive, how do they connect, how do owls connect to dreams? Like I've spoken to people before who, kind of dreams are like their specialist subject kind of thing. And I've heard people say that owls crop up frequently as like symbols in dreams and as kind of characters in dreams. What do you make of the connection there? Like, and have you got many, like you said, you don't include them in your files, but have you kind of gone through
I
much?
include them in my files. I don't include them in the 5 modalities.
Okay, got you. Okay,
I could.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? I could just add another one there and just say dreams, and I got a lot. Oh, the dreams are like, so it's, woman gets a hold of me. Do you know who Robert Moss is?
I don't actually.
Robert Moss is a author, and he writes about dreaming.
Right.
He one of his books is called Dreaming Your Way Back Home, and he says something like, I coach people and encourage people to use dreams to become their most authentic self. Like basically, like he's very wonderful speaker, really charismatic guy. So, woman has a dream. She's standing in a field of snow, and this owl flies in and then dive bombs and like plops right into the snow. So it's like its little butt and its legs are sticking up, and this is in a dream. And then Robert Moss charges out of the forest and comes right up to her and points to the owl and says, "It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor." I just thought that was so wonderful. The guy who wrote the book on dream language, like invades her dream and says that it's a metaphor. When I first met Andrea, like she saw me at a UFO conference give a talk on, that's how we met. I was talking about owls. And she said, "Oh, I keep track of all my dreams." And it's like, do you really keep track of them? Yeah, like I printed them up. I printed a big stack of my dreams up. And like, where's the file? She's like, "I don't know where it is. Let me look for it." And she found it and she handed it to me. So it's this big, thick stack of papers. And the very first line was, this is someone I lived with for 6 years, wonderful, wonderful woman. And the first line was, I had a dream last night where a black owl picked me up and flew with me through the forest, and then we landed on a tree and we cuddled together. That was the first line of her dreams. So and I'm cautious in a sense because an owl is an archetypal element. So archetypes should emerge in our dreams. Wolves and heroes and villains and things like that show up in our dreams. So these archetypes are part of our dream language. But I certainly tap into those dreams, especially when when the dreams are symbolically tied into, real life events and such, or let's say mystical events.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because dreams, like, people can have seemingly like communications with deceased via dreams, right? They can be precognitive, as we kind of mentioned earlier, and a bunch of everything else. Like dreams are similar to meditation in the sense that they seem to creep into all these various phenomena. And obviously with the UFO kind of contact experiences, like lots of people say it's kind of, like, I don't know, as you kind of mentioned with your own one, like you said, you're pretty sure that wasn't a dream, but you say it kind of felt dreamlike. And obviously lots of people say, oh, I don't even know if my experience was a dream or if I was awake, or I just don't know. I don't know what to make of it. Like, yeah. So dreams. How
does it change your life is what I would say. That's the proof in the pudding, I guess, is how has it changed?
Although, like, you could have your life changed by something that is just a dream, right? Although just a dream, I feel like I'm dismissing something that could still be meaningful, because obviously it doesn't have to be.
I talked to one woman. She had and this takes a long time to tell. I won't go into the story. It's a wonderful story. It takes a long time to tell. Oh my God, there's owls and deer and it's rich. It's shamanistic stuff and it's so powerful. Like literally, people cry if I she was crying when she told me this story, and it's like, really? So, and then I asked her, like, do you have any UFO experiences? Like, no, never had a UFO experience except a UFO dream. What was the dream? Well, I was on board this craft, and these little beings like sat me down and talked to me, and they said, "You need to quit your job and become a pilot, like flying airplanes. You need to quit your job and become a pilot." Okay, well, that's the only UFO type thing. Yeah, it was just a dream. It's like, what happened? Well, I quit my job and became a pilot. It's like, well, that's pretty big, right? I mean, like, it's not like if she followed the advice of this dream. So and then at the same time, she had this rich, shamanic, multi-layered set of events with this owl. Yeah.
Wow. I've got a couple of questions here from Patrick at Vetted. I don't know if you come across his channel. He covers the UFO phenomenon a lot. Could the phenomenon be lying to us?
Could it? Yes. Oh, yeah. It could be lying. Another way to say it, is it theatrical, right? So you go into a play, the lights go down in the theater, there's people on the stage. The people on stage are lying, right? They're not really, he's not really King Lear, so you can, but through the story that's presented on the stage, you can get swept away in the story. So yeah, oh yeah, they could be lying. But it's very rare that I get accounts where, like that's the line that the owl telepathically told to Karis. Like, why can't I be both? You're both. Is that a lie? Like, Karis is a real person. Like, right? I mean,
but what's a person, right?
Yeah. So it's like, it really gets murky. So yes, absolutely, they could be lying. And so here's one lie that I think, this is me. I can't prove this, but this is certainly my sense. When, people will be on board a craft and they'll say to the, the beings, like, where are you from? And they'll say, we're from Zeta Reticuli. Zeta Reticuli is a star in the night sky. And I'm like, maybe they're from Pleiades, maybe they're from Sirius, maybe they're from Zeta Reticuli. So but at the same time, like, a little kid can go to the shopping mall, in December, and there's a guy in a red suit with a big white beard, and they sit on his lap and they ask, where do you live? And he'll say, I live at the North Pole. He's not lying to the little kid. I mean, he's lying to the little kid, but it's all part of this theatrical thing. It's a wonderful thing. So yes, the answer is 100%. It could be full of lies, but I would say, what's the metaphoric or symbolic story that's being presented?
And I guess, like, my kind of burning follow-up question, one of them is, like, is it more along the lines of a white lie, like with telling the kid that, oh yeah, I live in the North Pole, or is it something darker? Is this whole thing a bit more murky? And what's your take on that?
There's all kinds of stories about, like, cult leaders being told what to do by the alien voices that led to suicides, and or like the whole cult will wait in a field for the mothership to land and nothing happens. So there's like all kinds of deception. If I take those stories literally, I don't know you can find examples of those stories. I don't know how legitimate the cult leader, the spiritual leader, was creating lies or manipulating, but I would say that is it a white lie? I mean, if my sense is that the UFO phenomena has been with us since the dawn of time, and it shows up in all kinds of ways through, fairy lore is one that's been well researched, and Vellet's work is vital to understanding the UFO experience. It's overlap with the fairy lore, but it's also ancient Christian lore and angels, and the Native American lore is rich with star beings and visitors from the stars and such like that. So, the star beings that talk to someone in South Dakota is going to have a different story that they tell than the gray alien that tells an insurance salesman in Ohio, on board a craft. They're going to tell two different things. Is the flavor of those two different things similar? Is there a message that's being nuanced for the individual, right? If you want to talk to, are they speaking a language that culture would understand in their lore? Like, is someone in Rome is gonna what just fell off the?
Must be a book.
What book was it? I want to know.
Let's find out. It's Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari.
Okay.
We were just saying what is a human a few minutes ago, so maybe it's something to do with that.
They could be full of white lies that are, and I would also say that this is well understood, is that the individual, the lore often gets, I'm waiting for another one to fall off now.
Yeah.
The lore seems to be tailored to the individual. It might not be the lore, it might not be the message that's physically spoken, but the clues seem to be very much tailored to the individual. Like a person, like I'm a map maker from all my outdoor work. I sleep outside, And like I have all kinds of experiences that seem to be tailored specifically for me. And I argue that point pretty well in my first book.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Again, it would kind of make sense to an extent, as much as any of this stuff can, in the sense that these other mystical experiences that we've touched on throughout this conversation are normally, they're individual, and people interpret them through their own lens, first of all on a cultural level, then on their own individual level, and everything along those lines. Part 2 from Patrick at Vetted: how can we trust what they show us? And maybe you're going to simply say we can't, based on the fact that they seem to lie to some extent. But what do you make of that? How can we trust what they show us?
How to say this? Like, so Bilbo Baggins walks down the trail, right? He might be confronted, his little troop of hobbits might be confronted with a wizard or somebody magical.
Sorry, I have to interrupt you just briefly, just to say, we were talking about, the owls in various places. Of course, you have the massive owls, the giant owls in Lord of the Rings, which save the day at the end and save Frodo and Sam. The giant owl is owls, isn't it? Or am I getting?
I think it's eagles.
Eagles. Oh, it is eagles.
It's eagles, which is another mythic animal. Right? So
sorry, carry on with Bilbo and the hobbits going into the forest.
There might be a wizened old man, or that'll give a little advice on the trail. Do they take that advice? Are they being deceptive? Is it a good entity that's giving? Yeah, it's. So I use this a lot, where I use fiction and folklore and mythology as a way to help frame this. Yeah, we are in a minefield of unknowns. So if there's a woman, she had a dream of being on board a flying saucer, and the being said, quit your job and become a pilot. She did. She was great. She had a great career as a pilot. So I don't know, there's sometimes these things are, I know people who have had, I could probably think of a bunch of examples. Often people who've had the UFO contact experience are told, write a book. Or even if they're not told, they suddenly are overcome with a compulsion to write a book. And if they don't write it, it's just makes them crazy. It's like no, I'm not going to write that book. And then it's like this anxiety to and when they write the book, there's I did it. Okay. So are they doing the bidding of these alien overlords? Or is this actually a true compulsion that's welling up from the self? It gets very murky to untie these things. If it was a fictional story, I could write it in a way where it would be very clear. But in the real life events, I could find some where the UFO entity says, you will write a book, and then the person writes the book, and the book. I mean, there's cases like that, but I think for the most part, it's much murkier than that. That's a great question, and it's murky. It's not clear in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And we've talked about the screen memory thing. How many do you think of your accounts would you say are actually screen memories versus something happening in our physical reality, but that's maybe more symbolic or synchronistic or something like that? How many do you think are actually, would you say, are manufactured?
So you can manufacture an event, like a synchronicity,
like the memory, like you said about the kind of screen memory where somebody remembers seeing an owl at the side of the road, but in fact, it was a screen for being taken aboard a craft.
A third of my stories, somewhere around
a third of them. Okay, so it's quite a lot then. Yeah, it's fascinating. So you obviously, after all of your years and the copious amounts of reading, of research, talking to people, everything, just diving down this rabbit hole head first, you are confident that there is a connection between owls and UFOs. And what, can you kind of put words to it? What you make of that connection at this point in your research? Obviously, I'm not coming to you for the final conclusion, but I guess your latest musings.
There's 1,000 pages of words. trying to address that. And then at the end, so I did my first, Richard Dolan, right? Or do you know of Rich? Yeah, so
I
Richard
know of
Dolan,
him. I don't know him personally. Yeah.
He published my first book, and we would talk on the phone and stuff like that, where he was reading the book. And he's funny. He's from New York City, and I'm from New York City, so we can go at it. And so he's like, Mike, I'm reading your book. I love it. I'm really enjoying your book. He wanted to publish it. So he's like, yeah, I'm looking to publish. I'm halfway through your book. When do you get to the part where you sum it all up? When you say what does it mean? What do the owls mean? I'm waiting for that part. And I'm like, Rich, you're going to be really disappointed. It's a 400-page book, and I never say what it is. So I did the second book. I can read it for you if you want. This is in the second. This is the follow-up book. This is called Stories from the Messengers. This is basically I had so many stories in this book.
Yeah.
And I couldn't fit them all in. This is 400.
It's like the overflow.
It's the overflow. But within those stories, I could tell these stories. This was 19 chapters. It reads like 19 short stories, and so I could really get into really tell the stories properly. Where it doesn't serve, you talk to someone for 6 hours on the phone, and then you put it in the book, and it's like Joe saw an owl on a fence, and that's all they get, and that doesn't. So I can read this too. It's right in the introduction here. Oh, when this book, Richard Dolan published this book initially first, and he's like, Mike, I'm letting you off the hook. You are not going to publish another book without explaining what the owls are. You cannot. I am not letting you do it. I'm not letting you write a book. And I'm like, okay. So here's what I said. Again, why owls? On a purely intellectual level, I don't know. Yet my gut feeling gives me a glimpse into some possible answers. Here are 4 ideas on what owls might mean, each of which are followed with another question. Number 1, owls are alarm clocks. The simplest answer would be they are here to wake us up. But wake us up to what? Number 2, owls are an archetype. They are a symbol, an image stored deep within humanity's genetic memory bank. It's as if there is a hidden meaning locked away within our grand shared consciousness, and the owl is the key. We think in symbols, and the owl is touching us on that level. And this deeper knowing goes back to the dawn of man. But what is the hidden archetypal meaning, right? So I give him an idea, and then right at the end, I got to say, but what is the archetypal meaning? Number 3, owls are here to announce initiation. An initiation is a ritual, like a young Catholic receiving the Eucharist during their first Holy Communion. Owls often seem to show up just before the arrival of a UFO, as if to announce an impending ritual. But an initiation into what? Number 4, owls are a totem of the transformational experience. Seeing a UFO can transform someone. I've spoken to a lot of people who have seen a strange craft in the sky, and in that moment, their entire definition of reality is altered. I've also spoken to people who have had owl sightings at such highly charged moments that it transformed their lives. But a transformation into what? So yeah, that's easier for me to read that than it is for me to just kind of say it off the cuff. But yeah, but it's a call to change.
Yeah.
Somehow embedded into that is this call to transform, to change. As wake up is synonymous with changing, is synonymous with initiation. Yeah, that's the best I could do. So I'm happy. It's easier for me to read that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you did pretty well, because obviously, as we've said, it's kind of it's impossible to sum it up in a certain sense. It's impossible to come to any conclusion, about what exactly this means. But yeah, I think you kind of
and that's the same coming up with a conclusion of what it's impossible to come up with a conclusion on what the UFOs mean. It's impossible to come up with a conclusion on what a synchronicity means.
Yeah. Just like what happens after we die. I'm pretty confident at this point that something happens after we die, but how is that going to work, and how is that going to look and feel and be? I couldn't begin to go into exactly how that's going to be, because it's just, there's so many, like we said, nuanced, conflicting, differing reports and angles. So yeah, fascinating stuff. When I spoke to Diana Walsh Pasulka fairly recently, where I'm going with this probably, she talked about her UAP sighting, which coincided with an owl encounter, which was incredible to hear about. And it kind of like lots of people ended up talking about that. It kind of went around the internet a little bit, and you said loads of people were sending it to you and everything like that. Yeah. I mean, it was like it's this crazy. I say that with respect. Like, I don't mean crazy as in I'm calling into question anybody's sanity, but these things are all crazy and all wild.
Intense,
right?
yeah, intense.
Yeah. But it was this kind of synchronistic UAP owl, had a little bit of everything. She spoke about her encounter, and she said that you called her, I think straight after the encounter. Something was it that? So first of all, can you kind of talk about it from your side? Like, how come you decided to call her, I guess, and like if there's any background that's relevant, like maybe say a few words about that.
So this was going back, I think this was 2014. It might have been 2013, but I think it was 2014. Okay. And I had met Chris Bledsoe. My sister lives in North Carolina, and Chris Bledsoe lives in North Carolina. I've visited him a few times. Mm-hmm. Whenever I go to see my sister, and so I'll visit. Have you heard of Chris Bledsoe?
Heard of him, yeah. I don't know.
Wow, this guy had some experiences. So he wrote a book recently called UFO of God. He frames it very much in a Christian format, where he sees the beings as angels, which is I understand, I can follow that completely, why he feels that way. So and I talked to him a lot, and so I was talking with him, and he's a southerner and talks really slow, and he's like, I was on the conversation, you should call Diana Pasulka. She's a professor at a college here in North Carolina, and I think you should talk to Diana Pasulka. And I'm like, great. I looked her up. I found her Facebook. She was like easy to find. It's Google. I just looked her up and found her phone number and her Facebook. I sent her either an email or a Facebook note. It might have been an email. And I said, hi, I'm friends with Chris Bledsoe. He said, we should talk, and I'm doing this research, and I would love to have the chance to talk with you. And she gets back to me right away. And it's like, okay, here's my number. Boom, I'm on the phone with her. Send the email. It's like one of those things where you send the email, ping, it pings right back. She must have been at her desk. And I get on the phone. And let me tell you, this is a chapter of my life where I was like on fire with this stuff. I'm much more at peace now, but wow, was I like wrapped tight. And I was like, I can be an intense force in a conversation. So I was in full mode right then. I was at my worst, I think, and maybe that's what it is. So she answers the phone. I'm like, have you ever had an experience with any odd experiences with owls and UFOs? And she goes, this was Monday. Called her on a Monday. And she went, Friday. And so it was more like me I've actually since talked with her and said, did I scare you on that call? Did I scare you? She said, you didn't scare me, but I knew you were someone who was really wrapped up in this, So but it was funny because I could tell I was like, it would have been like the person at the party that you were like, oh, I should avoid this guy because he's too intense. But she had the experience on near the beach. Mm-hmm. And so the question, I was not fully in the mode at that point where I was asking these questions, but leading up to the event, she had a very stressful day at work. And there were all kinds of issues and things. And it was August 15th. So that would have been the day. And August 15th she's Catholic, so it's a day of obligation. Yeah. It's a holy day of obligation. It's the feast of, I think it's called I want to say it's the Feast of the Blessed Virgin. It might be so you're obligated to go to Mass.
Right.
Like Ash Wednesday or Sunday or something like that. So she had gone to this is me in my interpretations. Like this whole event was there was a formal ceremonial ritual that she took part in. Like she went to it's like a normal thing for a Catholic to do, is to go. But it's a formal ritual. So it began with a formal ritual, and then she was with her husband, and she heard an owl, And she kind of looked around and said, why is there an owl during the day? Why is the owl on the beach here? It wasn't really the beach. I think it was like a restaurant that had a deck. And then she looked up and there was an odd light in the sky. It wasn't much. It was a tiny dot. It seemed to be kind of silvery. I want to be really cautious. I tell other people's stories all the time, and I do my best to tell them accurately, but I know I mess up sometimes. And then her husband was there, and she said, look, what does that look like? And he said something to the effect of, well, it's not making any trajectory that would be normal. It's not flying around like a normal aircraft or a kite or a balloon or anything like that. And then she kind of forgot about it. And then Monday, which was the day I called her, she was reading a letter that came from her comrade, her academic peer, Jeffrey Kripal, had written an essay about Whitley Strieber. He's written a lot about Whitley Strieber. They're friends. They wrote a book together. But at the time, it was just an essay he had written about Whitley Strieber, and she was reading the part where Whitley Strieber had a powerful owl experience at the time of his first event that would have been Christmas Day, the night of Christmas Day, 1985. And the book was very popular. Communion was very popular, and it ushered in this like new era of UFO research where people were responding to that book on a very deep emotional level. It's a beautifully written book, but he writes about an owl. So she was reading from her comrade, Jeff Kripal, she was reading an essay about a UFO experiencer seeing an owl, and then ping, my email comes in as she gets to that point. I think I've got this right. If it's close, if I'm not exactly right. So I asked, and she had forgotten about the UFO and owl event from Friday. On Monday, she's reading about a UFO and owl event. And then I call her up and say, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls and UFOs? And she said, like she was aware that there was this overlap of, this is the problem, right? It's like one synchronicity on top of another, on top of another. She actually said, she got back to me. I'm not sure if she said it that day or she got back to me. And she said, there were some news reports of UFOs in that area. And she gave me a link to, it was like a television, like news clip. It was short. It wasn't that remarkable. It was like, people reported this. And there was like some blurry footage that didn't look like anything, like a little polka dot in the sky. So yeah, so that, it's funny on the grand scale of like intensity, that's coming in at kind of a B- compared to the other stories. But in another sense, it's perfect, right? So it's a collision of owls, UFOs, and synchronicities. That would be the triad that really is remarkable to me. So it's less that the UFO sighting, it's not just the UFO sighting, it's the collision of all these other things, these synchronistic things, including, me calling her at that moment.
Exactly. That's the cherry on the cake, right? The authority on UFOs and owls
the owl guy. The owl guy calls her. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
And so funny,
why? Go. Sorry. No, please.
Oh no, but I got to reiterate that I was pretty pushy at that point. I'm a much calmer researcher at this point. I bet you I was pretty annoying, but keep going.
Yeah.
So
no, I was just going to ask, again, how come you decided to reach out to her at that moment? It was somebody had suggested.
Chris Bledsoe said,
but it was you decided to call her straight away. You just felt compelled to call her at that moment, because again, obviously you could have waited a week and
I could have meditated and I could have had an impulse. No, it was just like I hung up the phone with Chris. I looked her up her number. I texted her. I can't remember how I did it. It was either through Facebook or through an email. She's a college professor. It was very easy to get her contact information. So I contacted her and boom. So it was like one of those, you have like the emails or might have been the Facebook text thing. So, where you click and then it just comes right back. Like, I got your message. What's your question? Like, can we talk? And she's like, sure, call me. And boom, 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 we were on the phone. Like, it happened. Sometimes that happens. It's like, oh, call me next Thursday. It wasn't like that. It was like, we were talking on the phone within minutes of me first reaching out to her.
Yeah. Wow. And obviously you had no expectation that she was going to tell you about an encounter she just had that featured UFOs and owls.
This was a chapter of my life where it just felt like I was on a synchronistic roller coaster.
Really?
So
Yeah.
it was just like, it didn't, I mean, it was, how to say this? I have since backed off a little bit in my, here's what I had to formally kind of like say, I am no longer allowed to be astonished.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So astonishment means your adrenaline goes up. It means you're in a state of agitation, which I was at that point. I was astonished all the time. I was having that at that chapter of my life. The owls and UFO synchronicities were unbelievable in my life. And so to have one more, it's astonishing, but it was normal. What I now say is I will not allow myself to be astonished. I will allow myself to be in awe. Like awe is a different mindset. Astonishment to me means you're a little frazzled, you're a little overwhelmed. Awe means you can take it in a reverent. You can respect the magic of the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So
Wow.
I was not in awe at that point. I was astonished, and I was in a continual state of astonishment, and it made me. It was not a healthy chapter of my life. It was like I was on fire. I wrote a lot, and a lot of the book emerged in that. This book.
Sounds
boy,
like
you
you
could
were
just
obsessed from what
feel
you're saying,
the
like an obsession. Yeah.
Oh, it was out of hand.
Yeah. Like you're lying in bed at night thinking of all this stuff. You wake up thinking of it, and it's like taking over your life. I suppose it was at that point.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's funny, and it came right after, on the heels of the event with Kristen, right? So like my life was going along one way. I went camping with Kristen, and then my life just like made a 90-degree turn, and it never went back. I tried to keep my old job. The old job fell apart. I tried to do. It was crazy what was going on there. I just used the word crazy. Yeah. So it was like, it was astonishing what went on. And I should, in retrospect, I should have been in awe of it. I wasn't.
It was awesome.
I was thunderstruck by all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And so the encounter that Diana had, you said that's kind of typical. Do you hear encounters similar to that quite a lot? You have a lot of cases like that. Just the kind of
I get 6 times a day. That's a little bit of an
of course they're all different, right?
Yeah, they're all different. So what I say is I've typed this about 10 million times. That's an exaggeration too. I say people can't reach to me and say, like, I've never told this story to my husband. I've never told this story to my wife. I'm telling it to you. And then they'll tell me a story, which is like the story Diana just told. And I'll say, I may not have heard. Sometimes I hear the exact same story. Wow. And then like feels like word for word at times, but oftentimes it's, I haven't heard that exact story, but I've heard many with the same flavor and mood. And I've typed that in response to people like, you are not alone. I've heard many stories with the same flavor and mood. And then I can go in, and then I'll start a back and forth dialogue. I'll ask those 5 questions that I rattled off a few times here. And then, so I think so she was looking for an owl and saw a UFO. And I have a lot of that. Like if someone will hear the hooting of an owl, here's the story. This is a friend of mine. Her name is Suzanne. She and her husband, Jack, they are both experiencers. They've both had UFO experiences. They were hearing a noise out their window. It was happening every night. Most nights, maybe not every night. And they didn't know what it was. And so Suzanne was like scrolling through, and she found some sounds of owls. And different owls make different sounds. So she realized they were hearing the sound of an eastern screech owl out their window. It makes a really funny noise. It sounds like a tiny horse winnowing. It's got this little high-pitched whinny kind of thing. It sounds like a little tiny horse. So she hears it in a tree in her backyard, an apple tree. So she gets her camera, or phone, excuse me. She gets her phone, and she walks in. She was going to record the sound for me. So this has a connection to me, directly to me. And so she's going to record it for me. She goes into the yard. She hears it in the tree, and she walks up to the tree to record it. And then there's a bright orange glowing orb hovering in the tree. And the hooting stops, the whinnying stops, and the light she sees it for a little bit, and then it poof, flashes out. So she heard an owl, walked towards it, was going to record the sound for me, the owl hooting for me, and saw a UFO. It was an unidentified flying object, or like an orb I consider a UFO, an orange orb. So she has an orange orb experience. She's looking for she hears an owl. So in a way, that's very similar to Diana's. Diana had a little tiny dot. She doesn't say it was anything impressive up in the sky, but it was making odd movements. It seemed like a tiny little dot. Silvery, I think she said.
And I think it was like yellowish, bright, I think.
Yeah, she said it was reflecting the sunshine off the surface of it and stuff. Yeah. So they're very similar stories. And that story with the in Suzanne's apple tree, I have that a story a lot. Very similar. Yeah. Very similar accounts.
Do you get a lot of accounts with orbs and lights?
Ooh, yeah. So I mean, it doesn't. I mean, like little orbs floating through the room and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. Weird. Of course, as with all of it. I want to hear a bit more about your own experiences. If that's okay.
Oh, no problem.
So you had your first experiences when you were a boy. You said when you were like 12 years old. You talked earlier about your experience when you were 30 and you saw the 5 beings outside. Have you had, I mean, you've obviously had loads of synchronicities and everything like that. You've kind of made that clear, but are there any other experiences that stand out with these ones, like as that kind of level? And what happened when you were 12, if you feel comfortable talking about it?
Ooh, we could be here for hours. So when I was 12, I had a missing time event in my neighborhood where I was walking home from a high school football game. This was in 1974, and so within the neighborhood I lived in, the high school wasn't too far away, and they had football games on Friday nights. What all the kids in the neighborhood did, they went to the football game, and I.
So you weren't playing.
No. I was.
So we can rule out concussion then.
I can rule out concussion and drugs. I was before that chapter. Yeah. So, the high school's close. You could stand in the driveway and hear the football game, right? They can hear the announcements in the football games. So I was walking home. I wanted to be home at 9:30. I told my parents I will be home at 9:30 because I want to see a television show that starts at 10. So we left. I walked home with a guy named Mike. His name was also Mike. And we walked home, and then there was a spot in the neighborhood just down the block from me, down the block and across the street, where I could put an X on the sidewalk. I know exactly to the inch where I was standing and it happened. And it felt like, so it's a calm evening, just calm, warm autumn evening. And there was this kind of click, click. And the sky was from autumn evening, the sky turned bright orange, the entire sky, and then click, went right back to, and it made no noise. It was super jarring. And I clearly remember saying, like, what just happened? Like, what happened? Was there like an explosion? Was it lightning? And didn't make any noise? Nothing made sense. We couldn't come up with an answer. So we walk further on into down the street, and I get to my house. His house was a little further into the neighborhood. So I said goodnight, and I walked in the house, and my parents were like, why are you out so late? They're waiting for me. Mom said, it's not late. I said I'd be home at 9:30. It's 9:30. And they pointed to the clock, and it was 11:30. And I was like, this was before the term missing time was understood, or any part of did not make any sense at all to me. And they were angry at me. So there was like an emotional thing. Like, they were angry at me, but I didn't do anything wrong because I knew I left the football. I knew I left the football game at exactly the right time. But somehow 2 hours are missing. Wow. The next Monday at school, the guy Mike and I were sitting in the cafeteria, and there's other kids and stuff. And I clearly remember this. And can I swear on this show?
Sure.
Okay. Sure. Okay. So he says, I say, yeah, something weird happened at Friday night. And he just says, yeah, we saw a UFO with fucking lights and everything. And I was like, I never saw a UFO. Why did he say he saw a UFO? It was really like upsetting to me. I was like, he's lying. I've since gotten back in contact with him. He does not remember the night at all. He does remember that I got in trouble for being home late, but he doesn't remember the orange light at all. And I told him the story with his quote, and this is exactly how I remember it. And I don't think I'm exaggerating, but I think I'm telling the story as best as I can recall. And I've told this story many, many times since then. I try not to embellish it but I'm trying to stay true to my memory. And so that happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And he said he doesn't recall seeing the UFO.
No recall. But he does remember that.
But he remembers you. Yeah. Wow. And I guess he didn't remember anything about him being home late and getting in the same kind of trouble.
Well, he had a bunch of brothers and sisters and stuff like that. And so I could just see him showing up at home and like the parents not even noticing really. So where I was, like my parents were. So anyway, and then there's so many odd little synchronicities that kind of swirl around that event and events that happened later and things like that, it's like, I feel strongly something happened that night. The implication is there was a UFO abduction event. That's a big leap, but I recognize the implication.
On some level, do you think that is what might have happened?
Yes. I can't prove it. Right? I've asked, I've gone, so, I mean, I can't, but.
How does it make you feel?
Well, it used to really freak me out. Like, wow. Like that, all that stuff I remember I just do this. This is my visual, no, I'm not going there. I don't want I don't want to deal with it. So, how does it make me feel? I'm not alone in this, in the sense that I talk to people all the time, right? So I'm the podiatrist talks to people all the time that have foot issues. That's not a mystery, right? So I'm doing UFO research. I talk to people all the time who claim to have UFO contact experiences, and they, so I realize that I have comrades. I'm not alone in this. So that has helped me enormously.
Yeah.
To take on this role as researcher, because I can interact with people and what happens now is I'm a little more calm with it. I can tell people, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I have no degree, I can't give advice, but I can say you're not alone. And sometimes that's all people need to hear.
Yeah.
So how does it make me feel? It's pretty unsettling.
I can imagine and not imagine at the same time, if you see what I mean. Have you ever considered hypnosis, or is it a case of you'd rather not know, or is it a case also of you don't know if you'd be able to trust what comes out of the hypnosis? Yeah. What did you think?
I've attempted hypnosis many times, not many times, but I think 3 times I attempted it, nothing came up. Very little fleeting things, or I retold the same story. I could see it very clearly in my mind, but it was no new information emerged from these things until 2017. Now, in 2017, I had a session. Are you familiar with Mary Rodwell? She's a researcher out of Australia. She's an English woman who lives in Australia. And wow, a story emerged that I was like, ooh, I don't know what to make of that story. And then I went in 2018, a year later, and I had a hypnosis session with Yvonne Smith, and the exact same story emerged. I'll tell that story. It is. I'm not shy about telling it, but it's going to take a few minutes to tell it, and it's a really powerful story in my own life. At the same time, I don't fully trust it, because the strangeness of hypnosis. I'll tell it if you want.
Yeah, sure. I mean, how long do you think it will take you to tell it? Is it we're talking 5-10 minutes, or are we talking
more than 5 or 10? Yeah, but less than 20. I don't know. Let me see how I do. Okay, so I because you asked, and it's important. So I didn't know what to make of it the first time I heard the story, and it involved, there was one night. So when I worked with Mary, we talked about a bunch of different things. So I was under for maybe an hour. So we talked about this, we talked about that, we talked about this, and there was all these things, and this one story emerged. And then when I talked with Yvonne, I said, I only want to talk about this one event, nothing else. It was an event that involved no fear. I had been on the night of March 10th, 2013. I was camped alone in a alongside a road in southern Utah. This is like the joke I make is like the location of the Roadrunner cartoons, with the beautiful orange rocks and stuff like that. So it was in this magical, beautiful place.
And a tumbleweed or something.
Oh, lots of tumbleweeds. Yeah. So, but it was a calm night, and it was March, so it was cold. And so I was driving home from a UFO conference in Arizona, and I got to where I was living at the time in Idaho. So it was a long drive. It would be like a 2 or 3 2-day drive. So I just slept on the side of the road. It was wonderful. I love camp sleeping out. That I did all kinds of outdoor work. So I slept on the side of the road with a big thick sleeping bag. And while I was there, there was like a turnout. It wasn't like a formal campsite, but obviously other people had slept there before, and there was campfire rings and stuff like that. There's nobody. Well, there was one other car there, but I went way past that car. And then I looked up at this hillside. At one point, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I looked up at this hillside, and I've drawn pictures of this, and I've written it. It takes about 30 pages of this book to tell the story.
Wow.
I looked up in the hillside, and there was this thing on the hillside, and I said to myself, that looks just like a landed flying saucer. It was like a black cylinder with dots of light around the edge of it. It was nighttime. It was far away. That looks just like a landed flying saucer. Now I was already the owl guy. I was already doing the owl research, and I'd been to a UFO conference and talking to all kinds of people, and I had fleeting psychic events in my life and stuff like, oh man, like if this was a UFO, like I should feel it, right? I should feel like some UFO vibe. I should know. And I stared at this thing, totally calm, beautiful night, big thick pillow, big thick sleeping bag, under the stars. This is the desert, billion trillion stars, really beautiful, calm, quiet, no moon. I was like, felt nothing. So I rolled over and went to sleep. I woke up a little while later, and there was a coyote howling near my head. I'd slept out a lot in the West.
What do you mean? How close to you was it?
It felt like if I had a dog biscuit, I could have just like tossed it like that, and a coyote could have caught it in its mouth. I never saw it. I sat up, the sagebrush around, like this is cowboy movie terrain. And it was like, I've heard a lot of coyotes, and I've never heard one that close and that loud. I have since speculated that it could have been like an auditory screen memory. Like it could have been no coyote at all. And then I was just hearing a projection somehow that I have no way to know, but that I have speculated and contemplated that. I don't know if it's true or not, but that one night, this event, the closest coyote ever. Coyote is a mythic animal. Coyote is a trickster. Coyote, especially in the lore of the Pueblo Indians that are in the desert Southwest right there. So I was confronted with a myth that's integral with the landscape. So I looked up at the round structure on the hill. It's still there. I rolled over, went back to sleep, woke up again, and there was a big juniper bush at my feet. And there was a bright light behind the juniper bush. And I was like, could that be a car? Is somebody pull in? Did they do the same thing I'm doing, just driving on a long drive and just want to sleep for the night? And didn't look like a car headlight, didn't look like a flashlight. So I rolled over and went to sleep. And then the next morning, when I got home the next day, I started driving when it was dark. So that was the night of the time change. So the clock on my phone or my little flip phone didn't match the time on my car, and I was like, what time is it? It was like, so I was already like, I sensed strongly something had happened that night. So I got home, I looked up on a map, and I wanted to find that round building. There's no round building there. I've since been back to that spot many times, and there's no round building on that hill. But there's no fear associated with that night. It was a really pretty night. It was magical.
Yeah, which is wild to me, because as an outsider, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, even just with the darkness, the
coyote near my head,
the coyote, like most people their minds would be racing.
I've spent a lot of time sleeping out under the stars. And it's funny. I have a lot of experiences I've had have been sleeping out like that. But no fear at all. None. No fear at all. Yeah. So I sat with Yvonne, and I said, I want to study this, to talk about this night. Oh, here. So this is like, to tell the story properly, when I contacted, like I was going to be in California at a certain point. So a couple months ahead, I knew I was going to be in California. So I called up Yvonne and said, we had met at conferences. And I said, I'm going to be in California on this day in August. I would love to do a session with you, a hypnosis session. She said, Mike, what a nice surprise to hear from you. I started reading your book, The Messengers, this morning.
Oh, really?
So this is just like interwoven into all of this stuff. Like,
yeah.
So I said, hey, when you put me under hypnosis, at some point you just ask me what's up with the owls. She goes, sure. So now here I'll tell you the story that what happened in the. So this event alongside the road in southern Utah, I call it my confirmation event. I kind of that in a collision with a few other events in psychic thing. A lot happened where I realized like, oh, I can no longer push this stuff away. I can no longer deny it. This is real. And I'd always been flooded with doubts, and those doubts just evaporated after that night. So I lay down on Yvonne's couch. She says, let's go back to where sleeping on the side of the road there, like by your. So I'm saying, describe what's happening. It's like, well, I'm lying on the pad. There's my car's there. The bush is there. I can look up and see the round structure on the hill there. And she said, okay, what happened? So it's like, it's just, I'm visualizing the event exactly like the memory. And she said, okay, just what else happens? And then there's like this kind of thing. And I go, it's them. It's them. I know it's them. And I'm talking about the bright light behind the bush. And I'm just like, oh, it's them. I know it's them. And it was really intense, the feeling. And then the next thing I say is like, I'm looking down at this big round thing. I'm floating in the air. I'm looking down at a big round thing. It's the big round structure on the hill. I'm floating above it. I'm looking down at it, but I think I'm still in the sleeping bag. And she goes, Mike, are you out of body? It's like, I don't know, but I'm looking down at this thing, but I think I'm still in the sleeping bag. And then whoosh, I'm walking down a hall. And it's like a curved hallway, right? So like imagine like if there was a hallway that ran around the inside of a flying saucer, this is what it felt like. So I'm in that round hallway. And immediately I go, I'm not tall. And I'm 6 foot tall. And I know just what it means to be 6 foot tall. It felt totally different. Like, I'm not tall. And she goes, look around. What do you see? And I look to my right and I look to my left. And on both sides of me are these gray beings with the bald heads and the big black eyes. And I'm the exact same height as them. And she goes, look down at your body. What do you see? And I look down and I've got these long skinny fingers and I've got this skinny body and I'm wearing like a shiny spacesuit. and I go, I think I'm a gray alien. And she doesn't flinch at all. She's like, okay, what happens next? Now let me back up a little bit. Like, I have no way to know whether this is true. It's a great story. Oh, wow, it's a great story. Is it true? Like, I am incapable of saying this is true. It's a great story. I would make.
But you can say you have not intentionally made up any aspect of that story, right? Like even if it's not true, it's on some subconscious level that.
Well, at the same time, I've been immersed in UFO research and reading accounts very similar to this. So if like my file cabinets in my memory bank are filled with stuff I'd read, so if I wanted to confabulate something, I had plenty of fodder to like make up a story that sounded great to a hypnotherapist, but. So I'm aware of all that, but here's how it played out. And it was funny because I would see these things not in a movie form, but it just felt like a little click, click, like a little flash. I would get like a still photograph. And then, so we're walking on this. And then the next thing is, she says, Mike, what happens next? And I'm in a conference room. And this conference room has got like ugly beige carpeting and crappy wallpaper and kind of like, harsh fluorescent lights above. Really like drab conference room, and there's like folding tables there. So I'm standing there and there's a table in front of me, like a plastic folding card table that you would get at the Walmart or something. And there are, I'm going to say like 8 beings. It's hard to know. Like sometimes it's like around 8 or 12 or something. There's beings sitting at that card table, or at that plastic table, and then and I couldn't see their faces, but my impression very much is they were gray beings, like the gray beings, but they were all kind of fuzzed out. And I go, why am I here? And they go, you volunteered for this. And I'm like, what does that mean? I volunteered for this. Why am I here? And they go, now is the time. I'm like, what does that mean? Now is the time. Why am I here? And we got stuck in this kind of thing where it was like I just couldn't get out of, why am I here? Now is the time. You volunteered for this. And there came this moment where I had this kind of break, where I just kind of like, I just was like suddenly furious. And I started screaming at these, I was like yelling, and it is rough listening. I mean, I'm so emotional. It is rough listening to the transcript. I mean, there's a recording that Yvonne made and I transcribed it. Wow, it's like, it is brutal to try to listen to that. So I'm like absolutely furious. I'm like, you never told me there would be pain and loneliness here. You never told me about being depressed. You never told me about sadness. You never told me it would be this hard being here. And I was like so forthright and so angry, and but the implication is that I had been one of them in a previous life. I had incarnated here on Earth in my present life. I mean, I'm me. I look like my parents. Like I look like my brother. I'm me. But there was some part of me from some other realm volunteered to be here. And I was so mad. I've had a history of depression. I'm not shy about talking about that. But wow. It was basically, I was saying, you never prepared me for the physical realm. Like wherever they are is in some etheric magic realm where they're just floating spheres of energy. Where here I am in this world, things are heavy, and there's emotions, and there's hard work, and there's pain. So I was swearing, and Yvonne is like, Mike, what? Why are you so emotional? Like, what do they want? And I scream, they want me to play some role. And then whoosh, I'm like, I felt like I went from like the veins bulging out in my head, as tense as I've ever been, to absolutely calm, like a Zen master. Felt like my heart stopped. I remember laying on the couch as calm as I've ever been in my life. I stopped breathing. Obviously my heart was still beating, but the enormity of it felt like so powerful. And then the audio on the tape is quiet for 45 seconds. And Yvonne says, what happens next? And I very calmly say, I think I'm back in the sleeping bag. And we talked a little bit, and she tried to ask me questions. And I was like, I don't know. Like, what does it mean? It's like, I don't know. And then she goes, and Mike, what is your connection to owls? And without skipping a beat, I say, the owls aren't important. Now, this was at a chapter of my life where I was like fully immersed in the owl research. I had written 2 books, getting up every morning and answering owl emails. I'm talking owls all day. I'm replying. I'm talking on the phone about owls. It's owls, owls, owls. That's all I'm thinking about. Owls are the most important thing at that chapter of my life. She asked me, what is your connection to owls? I say, the owls aren't important. Now, in the hypnosis session, you can there's this kind of, when people are under hypnosis, they talk really quietly. And there's long pauses. And I was speaking very clearly, very plainly. And I said, and this is like seared into my memory. I said, the owls aren't important. I am an artist, and I understand how people take in a symbol and how people need a symbol. The owl is not important. The owl is a symbol on a door. The owl is the correct symbol for the door, but the owl is not important. The door is important. We are on this side of the door in a tight, claustrophobic little hallway. And on the other side of the door is an infinite vastness. And that's all I got. And then she took me out, and I have that moment of saying the owls aren't important. Earlier I said, like you cling to something and it's unhealthy. Wow, did that allow me to just take a step back and be less clinging to the owl itself and seeing it truly as a symbol and less as like a be all and end all to the research. So I asked her, was I channeling? And she said, how would I know? Which is a good answer. So, but it felt like, okay, so that event of March 10th, 2013 happened. I got home. I looked up on Google Maps to see if there was a round structure on the hill. Mm-hmm. And then I made some notes. I did some drawings. I did a blog post. And then the next day, March 12th, I had this complete knowing, this is real. This has been part of my life. I'm involved. I cannot deny it. And also on that same day, it took me years to figure this out, I started writing the book, The Messengers, on March 12th, 2013. That was less than 48 hours after the event, under the stars on the side of the road in Utah. Yvonne asked me while I was under hypnosis, what do they want? We were describing that night. She says, what do they want? And I screamed, they want me to play some role. Looking back now, like the book emerged right after that. I said, they want me to play some role. And I wrote this book. Like 48 hours later, I started writing it, the book that has defined my life. I have to cautiously speculate. I don't know. I'm cautiously speculating. Was I told or forced or coerced or what? I don't know. Did I write that under, was it written by an outside source? Like I wrestle with all these questions. Like I typed all those things. I talked to all the witnesses on the phone and like I wrote it. But what a strange book to emerge out of that event. So that's, and I will tell you what, there is no tacky conference room on board a flying saucer. So the conference room, do you know what a three-sided set is? Like in a theater, like on a stage, this right wall and the left wall and the back wall. And then the front wall is open to the audience. Mm-hmm. There's no wall there so that people in the theater can see it. The conference room, in my mind, I never saw the fourth wall. It was a three-sided set. It was theater. It's theater. There's no, so I'm left awash in questions. If I take it as a story, I can say, what a wonderful poetic story. Like I'm me, I don't feel like I'm from some other dimension. I feel like I'm from here. I love the earth. I love sleeping out under the stars. And then to have it being the culmination of that, have it to be so poetic that those 5 sentences about the owls aren't important. Wow, did that really give me a sense of a new way to frame it where I could be much calmer in the way I try to address this overall mystery.
Yeah. Wow. Whoa. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's, yeah.
Well, you asked, incredible. And I said, how much time you got? It takes a little while to tell that story. If to leave anything, I mean, there's that story goes on. There's stuff connected all over the place to that story. It just goes on. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's incredible. I guess the only question I'll ask you about it for now is just again, you've thought about it, no doubt, for endless hours, and you've replayed it in your mind and you've questioned yourself and, all of this. So do you think it was do you think that was what actually happened? Like, is that your personal feeling? And again, I know you're not 100% sure either way. I know you said you leave it open, but what's your leaning?
My brother went to a conference. I stand on stage with slides and I tell the story, and I got illustrations and maps and like, here I was in this spot, and I tell the whole story, it's very theatrical when I tell it on stage. I know it's a powerful story and I want to share that. My brother he's not the kind of person who's interested in this stuff. And afterwards he said, do you think you were on that ship? Do you really think you were on that ship? And I was like, when I sleep outside, when I sleep outside, my hands get cold. I've slept a lot in the mountains and done winter camping and stuff like that. So I have a pair of gloves that I keep in my, and I wear like a down jacket, but I want the gloves accessible. So I set them right in like my armpit, like that fold in the inside of the jacket. And if you're sleeping, they don't fall out. So if my hands are cold in the middle of the night, I just can put on the gloves. I've camped enough to know this is completely habit for me. When I stood up that morning on the side of the road, the gloves fell out, plop, and they fell on the ground. So if I had left the sleeping bag and been physically on, that the gloves would have fallen out. So I remember that morning thinking like, well, the gloves, like, did I leave the sleeping bag? I don't think I left the sleeping bag. Did it happen in an astral form? Was it like an out of body experience where, like, did they need me? Here's what I've speculated. Did they need me in an out of body form, like in my astral form, in my soul form, whatever essence you want to call it, in order to put me in that gray being? You know what it felt like? And I actually spoke with Mary Rodwell at length about this. It felt like there was a rubber suit on a hook waiting for me in that craft. And I just, like, in my astral form, whoop, went right in it and was walking right down the hall. So I am open. That's the problem. I can tell it 10 different ways. Each way can kind of have its own sort of truth to it, but
it's the best way to be.
Yeah.
The experience, like your memory, that you just kind of share it, and the interpretation is a different thing. You make me think of something else, is like a question I was going to ask you earlier about these gray beings, especially when you said about this suit hanging up. Like lots of people talk about the gray beings as if they're not biological, right? As if they're kind of like a technology or a mixture, I don't know, like an android. Is that the sense you get from all of your reports, like all of your archives and files and accounts? Do you get the sense that it would be a biological thing, these small grays, or do you get the sense it would be something different?
I mean, what feels more real to me, and I think I said this earlier, is that they feel like more like a drone, like a beehive, like the bees in a beehive are all performing their duty. It's completely robotic in the sense that the bees get up, they fly, they collect the pollen, they bring it back, they turn it into honey, they service the queen. I mean, they're stuck in this one duty. So it feels, that would be a better way for me to describe it. It feels more like, this doesn't make it true, but this is it. They certainly could be androids. They certainly could be a biological robot. But
biological suit, maybe, or like a technological biological suit created for consciousness to inhibit.
If wherever we are, so the people have asked this shows up in the literature. I would be hard pressed to find an example. I'm gonna distill several accounts and kind of boil it down. But within the literature, they ask the beings, are you like real? What are you? Like, why do you look like that? And the beings will say, we have been engineered to take on this role, but we need this suit in order to enter your dimension.
Right.
Because we are from another dimension. We cannot easily enter your dimension, but we have been either genetically or scientifically or technologically created in order to pass into your dimension. So that would like the light beings, the forms of energy, could inhabit these little gray android meat suits, biological suits, and then interact with us where they may not be able to even come into our reality, right? Their reality and our reality might be so highly different that they simply can't pass. Like, we can't go to the bottom of the ocean without special gear, without a special suit.
Yeah, interesting. And look, I want to get to my last couple of questions. Great. Right? I don't want to take up too much time. Just I could talk about your experiences for longer. Maybe we will next time. Just one briefly before we do. When you were 30 and you saw the beings outside. Oh yeah, you told me you kind of went back to sleep, right? And you don't remember anything else that happened in that encounter. Okay, yeah, no, I forgot that we tied that one up, and I just wanted to make sure we did. I guess is where I was going with that. So the next question I have for you, and again, speculation, right? This speculation territory. This is not any kind of firm conclusions. What do you think the deal is, like, in terms of origin of this, the UFO phenomenon, the UAP phenomenon, all of this stuff, like the stuff where how it connects to owls? Obviously, we know the main kind of, origin hypothesis that people put forward. So it's like, as we've said a few times, the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis. You've got the future human hypothesis. You've got this interdimensional idea. Some people, the crypto-terrestrial or ultra-terrestrial. There's all sorts. There's probably a bunch of others that I'm not mentioning. But what is your kind of leaning or your take, or do you allow yourself to speculate on that? Obviously, it could be multiple, of course.
Yeah.
Sorry.
My very strong sense is that this is a phenomenon that has been parallel to humankind since the dawn of man. My sense is that they may have, I think even in some of the, like Grush, I've got to be really careful. I can't remember, like one of Grush's statements was that these beings, like the crash retrieval, they had bodies, and that the DNA was similar to humans. Like that's out there somewhere. I don't know the source of that off the top of my head, but there's all kinds of like interbreeding kind of things. And if you get into this, there's some sex stories where people have sex with these beings too. So that's right out of the literature too. That's like the incubus and the succubus that, come and invade people's lives in, Europe in the Middle Ages. So there's a rich mythic lore that taps into. So my sense is that these beings very well could have created us. Again, speculation, I'm open to that. Things get very tidy if you think about that we are their invention. Time means something else to them entirely. They don't, like the fact that human history and from our evolutionary stance is a long time for us, but it's not long for them because they have a different relationship with time. So, my sense, very strong sense, is that they have been here from the very start. I think they are simply in a shiny new costume, right? Like in the olden times, like you could have, they would wear togas and live on Mount Olympus, and now they wear spacesuits and they live in flying saucers, right? So there's similarities between the Native American Star People lore and the Irish fairy lore and the Catholic angelic lore. So there's these similarities that are in place. I strongly sense, I don't know, but I strongly sense that this is a simply theater, and they have changed costume, right? Who's going to buy, nobody's going to, like, if you said, oh, like I walked through the woods and there was a little leprechaun and he took me to the magical land of the fairies, and then I returned, and like, but you can say, oh, I saw a landed metal spaceship and I met these beings that look similar to us. We live in this scientific age, so our mythology is being presented to us in a scientific theatrical form. So I can't say it's true, but that's my strong sense, that we're being confronted with theater.
Yeah. Okay. And again, do you have a sense on if it's an intelligence that's, you say it's been here for a long time, but do you think it's from here, or do you think it's from somewhere else, like in terms of another planet or somewhere else in another dimension? Like, do you have any leaning on that?
Well, I mean, things like heaven, right? That's like something we have in our folklore. Like, where is heaven? Like, we say heaven's up in the clouds, but that's symbolic. That doesn't mean anything. Like, where do we go when we die? Like, where is this? So my sense is that there is an alternate realm of reality. And I know very little about this alternate realm. My sense is that whoever's on that alternate realm can look into our reality easily, and we can get a fleeting glimpse very occasionally into their realm, maybe through a dream, maybe through heavy meditation, maybe through like an orb floating through the room. Maybe that's just some overlap between our dimensions. So my sense is that it comes from another planet. Is too simplistic. It might be part of it, but I think that for me, And again, I'm not looking at the big totality. I'm looking at the narrowest little sliver and pulling on the weirdest little thread in these owl stories. For me, it feels like it's a, they're from the place of myth. Sometimes I will call them the myth makers. I think they are seeding us with a new myth, because the old myth of the fairies in the forest, or the or of the the talking buffalo in the plains of South Dakota, those myths aren't serving us anymore. We need a new myth. So our new myth is these smart people who are more advanced than us that come and visit us on a metal spaceship. That, to me, that it is a myth. That's how I see it. The stories are too strange.
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating thoughts, and yeah, you're right. Like, it is too strange. I always kind of thought the extraterrestrial hypothesis was the most straightforward, rational, simple, thing to explain this, and to an extent, I still think that way. But I absolutely agree that, like, yeah, there's so much that doesn't really fit. This goes so much beyond what would be logical in that sense. Like you've said a few times, scientists on spaceships, like it wouldn't exactly, it doesn't necessarily explain everything in this neatly packaged box. Anyway, sorry, you're going to say something?
Oh, I agree. I just agree completely. Yeah. You have to willfully ignore certain, or not certain, like huge swaths of the data. So you go to, this is a UFO, I use this analogy all the time, which I've done. You go to a UFO conference and you talk to a researcher, a nuts and bolts researcher, and you get him at the bar. You get a couple glasses of wine in them, and like, what do you really think? And then they're like, it's like, have you heard of the weird stories, like synchronistic stories? And they're like, oh, I hear them all the time. They don't share it publicly, but they know. They want to be, this is, and I've asked them, like, why don't you share these? And they say, they say, I want to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
And I'm at a point now where I'm like, I give up. Like, if I just feel like I'm lying if I don't tell the story as completely as I can tell it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Gary Nolan that he said something fairly recently, and I think it gained quite a lot of traction. I think he said the woo is right around the corner, something like that.
Oh.
And it's like there. It's not even around the corner. It's here. It's just most people can't see it yet. It's gonna hit you in the face, right? Like, you can't ignore it. It's there. I don't really like the word woo, but
it's a fine word.
It's absolutely there.
I mean, the physicist who's studying quantum theory, there's some line, I can't remember who said it. It was like Max Planck or something like that, but said something like, if you look into quantum theory and aren't astonished or aren't blown away or aren't, then you don't understand, then you're not paying attention. Like, it's just
or is it something like, if you understand it, then you're not paying attention? Something like that.
Like, if
maybe that was someone else.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is the same thing, and I think the people who are looking at the tiny particles through an electron microscope are having the same issues. I think the people who are doing psychical research and looking at psi abilities, they're coming to this. They're saying essentially the same thing. So I think there's different branches of science that are touching these taboo subjects and finding that there is a there, and that's the same thing that's happening with, well, I can't speak to the UFO subculture as one cohesive unit, because it's like the little kids at the elementary school playground. It's a lot of factions and sniping and backstabbing and kind of egos and things like that. But what I can say is that if you really listen to the accounts, I've been talking for a bunch of hours here now, that like, wow, did they get weird? And it's that weirdness that, for me, that's what I'm most intrigued by. So I'm like, well, I'm going right for those things.
Yeah. I got a couple of questions here from Joe, one of my patrons. Again, like Jimmy that I mentioned earlier, Joe has wanted to get you on the show for ages. He's a big fan of your work. He's read your books and everything. He says, have you ever seen or heard any evidence or witness accounts that could suggest that technology, or a kind of spiritual technology, is being used by UFO nauts to manipulate causality and play with time?
Oh, it's all over. It's all over this. It's all over the reports. Yeah, it's all over the reports. So there's one account of I'm not going to do justice to this. There was like what seemed like a missing time abduction thing on a beach. Someone had missing time on a beach. They left the hotel. They went into the they well they well they excuse me, they parked their rent-a-car at a parking lot, and then they went to the beach, and then they had a missing time event, and then they came home, and there's like video footage of the car parked, and none of the time makes sense. The car parked when it's parked, when the car comes and leaves doesn't make sense to their memory. And so it's like it's just researching, like, with very pragmatic detective tools like surveillance cameras that are on a parking lot. They should be able to solve the riddle. It just gets more complicated because it's just as loopy and mixed up as every other part of the story. So yes, absolutely, whether it's psychic, I mean, that's, people come back from these experiences and they have increased psychic abilities. That's very commonly reported. Even very conservative organizations like MUFON ask that in their questionnaire. Has your psychic abilities changed? So yeah, it's very difficult because you have one account, you can follow that one account and maybe make a logical explanation of it. You get a similar account, it doesn't follow the same patterns. It strays, and you're dealing with conflicting data points, and that's just woven into the tapestry of the whole mystery.
Yeah, all of these phenomena. As soon as you think you're finding a pattern, it will just get blown out of the water. Yeah. Part B of this question from Joe: could this suggest that the UFO nauts are interdimensional beings or time travelers that have some stake in our future?
Well, if they are somehow intertwined with us, then they certainly would have a stake with yeah. So they seem to be intertwined with us somehow. That's my sense from the beginning of time. And then so we're at this, the time keeps going, we're headed somewhere. I think they want to, I mean, there's all kinds of things where they're clearly, I mean, the issues with turning off nuclear warheads in the silo and things like that. Those are demonstrations, theatrical demonstrations to say, like, okay, like, we're not going to let the kids play with the matches, So even though, there's been horrendous, catastrophic wars throughout human history, they're basically saying you got to be real. We're at a stage now where our technology has surpassed our spirituality. Like, we've got dangerous military armaments that could end life as we know it. Everyone in the world knows this, and that yet we're still have the mindset of warring tribes, on each side of the river, beating our chests.
Yeah, unfortunately. Do you think, well, I mean, abductions, right? They seemingly happen, these abduction experiences. Speculate with me in terms of, do you have any kind of leaning as to why you think they happen? And of course, based on all the accounts and cases you've read through and people you've spoken to, do you have any leaning as, like, does there seem to be any kind of real pattern there that linear, like, is there something that's like, oh yeah, I think this is why they're taking people, or is it just too weird?
Well, it's weird, but so there was a point, sort of, let's say, from the 70s in through the early 90s. There's like this kind of there's like a statistical bell curve of consistent reports, and those reports are of hybridization, women being pregnant, sperm being taken from men, lots of strange pregnancies that actually showed up in one of the government documents. This is going back over a year now, where in the flood of all this new government stuff, there was a very, very bland document that came out. Basically said, we're studying it, but somewhere in there was a little line, and it said, we have noticed a pattern of strange pregnancies. I have talked with many women, and men too, with talking about their wives and such, where these issues of unknown pregnancies and memories I'm not, so what's very commonly reported is, it's less so now, but it was part of the lore. Women would be abducted, taken aboard the craft, let's say, and then they would have a memory of a child being presented to them, and they were told to bond with the child. So they were asked to hug the child or nurse the child. So the implication is it is their child, and they are, that the beings know that humankind needs that nurturing closeness of a mother, but those gray android beings cannot provide that nurturing quality. So they bring the mother in to hug the child. It's very like, wow, is this literally true? I've talked to a lot of women who've gone to the doctor and said, the doctor says, you're pregnant. And the woman says, I can't be pregnant. I'm not sexually active. And then later they'll go back to the doctor and the doctor will say, you had an abortion. And the woman will say, I did not have an abortion. She didn't remember having a miscarriage. She didn't, the fetus is simply gone. She's on the medical records saying, and I can speak with there's a researcher, Peter Robbins, who worked with Bud Hopkins, who looked at a lot of like medical documentation. Woman goes in, she's pregnant. Sometime later, she's not pregnant. She didn't have an abortion. These were common. My sense is that they're still happening, but not to the volume that they were happening between the 70s through the early 90s.
Yeah. I've heard the same kind of thing. I spoke to somebody just very recently. I think, yesterday I spoke to somebody, a scientist who told me about like a childhood friend or a friend from earlier in his life, a lady that had some kind of experience with a UFO, and maybe along the lines of the experiences we've talked about today. She wasn't sure if it was an abduction experience, but it kind of, it hinted towards that. And I think he said that she had a miscarriage like not long after that experience, and I don't think she knew she was pregnant or anything. I can't remember the details, but she had this miscarriage, really bizarre timing with that experience. So interesting. Let me ask you your thoughts in a nutshell. So just kind of in like a 2-minute summation of your thoughts on the current state of the UFO issue, disclosure, David Grush, where we're headed, all of that kind of stuff.
Well, people ask me this all the time. Now, first of all, like I don't need any, like I've had my disclosure event. Like I've had, like I'm convinced something is happening. I don't quite know the source of it, but I know something is happening. I do not feel beholden at all from someone in authority to like in a position from a podium at the White House. I don't need someone to tell me that this is real. Some other people certainly are clamoring for it. Doesn't mean anything to me. Like I recognize I'm telling these stories. I am not a mainstream UFO researcher. I realize I'm in it for different reasons. Totally, I've talked about that earlier. Just my own personal seeking. I got to understand what may or may not have happened in my life. So I got no skin in the game for disclosure. Like I would be the last person you would want on 60 Minutes talking about whatever. Like
they're not ready for you.
They're not ready for me. But at the same time, like it's still like they're not ready to hear, the laser beam shooting out of an owl's third eye.
They're not even ready to hear necessarily about, basic remote viewing and telepathy experiments. It seems like they're not.
Yeah, but my email inbox is full. People are telling me the same stories over and over again. There's a definite pattern in what I'm working with. So the present state of ufology, it's in a funny way, it's kind of like I can palpably feel that the whole realm has shifted and the spotlight is over there. Like it used to be, I used to get called into conferences to talk and stuff like that. And it feels like, nope, like the spotlight is over here now. And we're taking it off Mike and his weird owl stories and putting it on some guy who studies government documents. I mean, that's important work. It's not my work, but it's, someone's got to do it. I'm not, I am so... The Gary Nolan saying, the woo is just, or things are about to get more woo, or the woo is about to get real, or whatever he said.
Around the corner.
Yeah, I think he's implying that, once you open the lid of Pandora's box, right? The Pandora's box, like the illusion is it's just metal spaceships, and we've got like a little fleck of a piece of metal that we've put under an electron microscope, and isn't that interesting? But once you open that up and you realize like, oh no, people are, women are getting pregnant, their child's being taken, there's people are becoming psychic, people are seeing owls, people are becoming Reiki healers. Like that's good. That's going to be they want to keep that box clamped. They want to control what comes out of that box. And I think everyone who's dipped their toe into this field knows that that's going to be, once that box gets opened, they're never going to be able to close it again. At the same time, I don't know, like as far as Grush, is he like a disinformation agent? Like I haven't paid that much attention to what he said, so I can't speak to that really. I've certainly talked to people who have odd military stories or odd kind of government involvement in their life, and that's kind of woven into the lore. So yeah, I am passionate about my own work, and as I said before, I'm passionate about the really weird stuff. So I think that we're gonna the answers, right? So here's this box of the nice tidy core of the UFO subject, but at the outside there's all this other stuff. I think the answers are going to come from these outside outlying data points, as opposed to the tidy logical data points in the center of the
I think in the center is going to be what convinces the masses and science and everything like that to take this phenomenon seriously, and then the stuff on the outside is the stuff that's going to lead to potential answers or more questions. But that's the meat, that's the meat of this whole thing, isn't it? Like but the stuff in the center, maybe it's just we've come to that point where that needs to be tackled, and it needs to be, we need to know what they've got, and we need to like empty the vaults if we can. And then I imagine if and when that happens, it's going to very much, the spotlight's going to shift back to the weird stuff, as you put it. One quick question. Again, I'm going to ask you to summarize probably something we could talk about for hours into like a 30-second answer. Just your gut feeling on what happens after we die.
I've been reading extensively about the near-death experience. So my strong sense is that I believe in, this is just coming from immersing myself in the near-death experience research. Like there's a transition point where we go, like we'll recycle, come back again, and that what gets reported in the near-death experience, not consistently, there's some other reports that don't play out like this, but the overwhelming pattern is this realm of universal love and magical timelessness, and that where we are here is like being on the flat movie screen. We're living in this two-dimensional realm almost. In that other realm is rich and timeless and multidimensional, where people will say, just can think of, there's a woman named Elizabeth Crone who wrote a beautiful book about her experiences. That's so, I have no reason not to trust exactly what Elizabeth Crone and so many other people have described.
Yeah. So you think we very much continue on in some form?
Yep.
Yeah.
And hopefully this is what the role of being on Earth would be is, I in a way said it in that hypnosis session. It emerged like this whatever we are here is this physical dense realm with problems and pains and sadness and suffering, but at the same time, this is a magical, joyous realm where we can...
A magical universe, as you say on your website.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just sleeping out under the stars is so powerful and so beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that I read on your website. You say, after all your research and writing, you now feel that you live in a magical universe. And I was going to tie up today by asking you, like, why do you feel like that, and in what ways do you think it's magical? But I think anybody that's
if you've made it this far,
yeah, the answers are very much in here. So, and I completely agree. You've been so generous with your time, Mike. I've really enjoyed talking to you. We could have done this for hours and hours. We could probably dissect it in half the topics, or most of the things we've touched on could have been at least an hour or two.
Any story
by themselves.
Any single story I told, I could have to tell. That's the problem. You do an interview and you have to tell a story that can be told quickly.
Yeah. Well, I think hopefully some of the stories have at least, we've given them some justice. But yeah, obviously people should read your books for more detail. Hopefully we'll get to talk again in the future and go into more of these stories. And because, I love hearing about it, and I really enjoyed talking with you. So again, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to doing it again sometime.
It was my honor. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you to Mike Clelland for talking with me. Thank you to our patrons for supporting us, and thank you for listening. If you've had any interesting experiences involving owls, please leave them in a comment. We'd love to read about them. Please check out the description for relevant links and other interviews you might enjoy. Please subscribe to continue unraveling the universe with us, and if you want to help us keep putting out content, please consider a monthly contribution via Patreon. Thank you.